My name is Nora Keegan. I was 33. I fix clothes for a living. Torn seams, worn cuffs, wedding dresses that have been folded in a box since 1962. People bring me things other people would throw away, and I make them last a little longer. On December 22nd, 2023. I drove home to Zanesville, Ohio for Christmas. It is 55 miles. I have driven it 1,000 times. The driveway was empty. All 3 cars were gone. The porch light was off. There was a wreath on the door and nobody behind it. I went in through the kitchen door because the front door has stuck since I was a girl. My grandmother was sitting at the kitchen table. In front of her was an old tin, the kind butter cookies come in, and the tin was full of buttons. She was sorting them into small piles by size. She did not look up. She did not say hello either. Her first words to me were a question. "Did you bring a pen that works?" I said yes. She nodded once and kept sorting. On the table, under the salt shaker, there was a note in my father's handwriting, 4 lines, torn off a yellow pad. It said they had flown to Aspen that morning. It said 6 nights. It said, "Do not call." The last line said, "Your grandmother is your problem now." He did not sign it. No phone call, no question, no thank you. The day before had been my 33rd birthday. Nobody in that house mentioned it. 6 days later, my father lost the company his mother built. And here's the part I did not understand yet. My father turned out to be the easiest of the 3. He shouting, "You can hear coming." The second one called me on the 9th of January and apologized, and she meant none of it, and it took me 6 months to see the shape of what she had already done. The third one waited 14 years. The third one sat at that same kitchen table and said nothing at all while everyone else screamed, and I did not learn why until the following winter. That is the end of it, though, and I am telling it out of order. Go back with me to the driveway, the empty house, the woman at the table with the buttons. I had left Columbus at 2 in the afternoon so I would get in before dark. December light in Ohio quits early. By the time I came off the state route, the sky was the color of dishwater, and the fields on either side were bare and gray. And I remember thinking that the house would be warm and loud, because it always was on the 22nd. It was not loud. I slowed at the mailbox out of habit. My father parks his truck at the top of the drive so nobody can block him in. My mother parks under the maple. Margot parks wherever she stops. That night there was nothing on the concrete but a patch of dry pavement where a car had been sitting when the frost came down, and the shape of it was already fading. I sat with the engine running for a second. I told myself they had gone out for dinner. The porch light was off and the wreath was up. The same wreath, the one with the wired ribbon my mother rewires every year so the loops sit right. Somebody had hung it and gone. I took my bag and went around to the kitchen door. Inside, the house smelled like a house nobody had cooked in. Cold coffee, dish soap, the furnace ticking somewhere under the floor. My grandmother was at the kitchen table under the hanging lamp, and she was working. That is the only word for it. She had a tin in front of her, an old butter cookie tin with a faded plaid lid, and the tin was open, and there were buttons everywhere. Not scattered, sorted. 4 small hills of them on a dish towel she had spread flat, and a 5th pile she was still building, 1 button at a time, turning each one over in her fingers first. She was 83 years old. Her back was straight the way it always was. She had her reading glasses down on her nose, the steel ones, and she did not look up when the door opened. "Did you bring a pen that works?" she said. I stood there with my bag still on my shoulder. "Grandma, where is everybody? Did you bring one?" "Yes." "Good." She set a button on the 3rd pile. "Not one of those hotel ones. A real one." "I have a real one." All right then. And that was it. She went back to sorting. I put my bag down by the washer. I walked through to the front of the house because I still did not believe it. The tree was up in the corner of the living room, lit, plugged into the timer. There were presents under it, wrapped in the silver paper my mother buys in August. I counted them without meaning to. 9. I crouched down and read the tags. 2 for my father, 3 for Margot, 1 for Peter. 2 for my mother, 1 with no tag at all, which I already knew was a spare in case someone came by. None of them said Nora. I want to be fair about this. It is possible my mother had one in the closet and had not brought it down yet. That is what I told myself on my knees on the carpet. And I have had 2 years to think about whether I believed it. And I did not. I went upstairs. My old room is the small one over the kitchen. It has been the room where the ironing board lives since about 2014. The bed was still in there, made up, and there was a stack of folded towels on it, and my mother's sewing basket on the chair, which I have always found funny in a way that is not actually funny. She keeps a sewing basket. She has never once asked me to look at anything in it. I came back down. My grandmother had not moved. How long have you been sitting there? Since about 1. Did you eat? I had a sandwich. I stood at the counter and looked at the piles on the towel. Brass ones, black ones, flat white ones with 4 holes. A pile of the heavy metal kind with a raised bar across the back. The kind that goes on a work jacket. What are you doing with all of these? Sorting them. I can see that. Why, she picked up another one, turned it over, held it near the lamp, and put it on the second hill. Because they are not sorted, she said. I laughed. It came out of me before I could stop it, and it was the first real thing I had felt in about 4 hours. Then I opened the refrigerator. Because that is a thing you do when you need to look at something instead of at a person. 1/2 gallon of milk, a carton of eggs, deli turkey, a bag of shredded cheese, a bag of carrots, 4 yogurts, and a foil pan of something my mother had covered and labeled in marker with a date. Enough food for 4 days if I was careful. Behind me, my grandmother tipped the tin, and a few more buttons ran out onto the towel. There is a note, she said. Under the salt. I closed the refrigerator. The day before had been my birthday. 33. I had spent it at the shop finishing a coat, and at 6 o'clock I had checked my phone, and there had been one message on it, from a woman named Deb who sells me thread. The salt shaker is a ceramic rooster. It has been on that table since before I was born, and it has never once held salt that pours. I lifted it and took the paper out from under it. Yellow legal pad, torn along the top so the edge came away ragged. 4 lines in my father's handwriting, which slants hard to the right and gets smaller as it goes, like he is running out of patience with his own sentence. I am going to read it to you the way it was written, because the wording matters. Nora, we flew out this morning, 6 nights, back the 29th. Don't call, the service up there is bad and we need an actual break. Your grandmother is your problem now. That was all of it. He did not sign it. He did not write love. He did not write thanks. He wrote don't call, and he underlined it twice. And the second line of the underline went past the word and off the edge of the paper. I read it 3 times standing up. Then I did what anybody does. I called him. It rang once and went to voicemail, which means the phone was on and somebody pressed the side button. I did not leave a message. I called again 4 minutes later and it went straight through to the recording, which means the phone was off. I texted Margot. I typed and deleted it twice. What I finally sent was, "Hey, I'm at the house. Is everything okay?" She answered 40 minutes later. A thumbs up. That was the whole reply. A yellow thumb on a black screen. At 4:51 in the afternoon. From a woman who once wrote me a 2-page email about a rug. I texted my mother. She answered faster, which surprised me. We're boarding in Denver. Grandma's meds are in the cabinet over the sink. Thank you, sweetheart. I looked at that word for a while. Sweetheart. It is what she calls the girl at the bank. I went and opened the cabinet over the sink, because I am the kind of person who checks. There was a plastic organizer in there with the days of the week on it, and it was full through Saturday and empty after that. Somebody had filled it 4 days out and stopped. There was also a list, in my mother's handwriting, which is round and even and looks like a form. Morning, evening. With food, not with the blue one. I stood there holding a piece of paper that told me how to keep an 83-year-old woman alive for 4 days out of 8. And I want to be clear that this is the part people always get wrong when I tell this story. They think the note on the table was the cruel thing. The note was rude. The pill organizer was the cruel thing. Somebody had sat at that counter with a plastic tray in front of them and counted out 4 days, and then decided that was enough thinking about it. Here is what I did next, and I am not proud of it. But it is what happened. I stood in that kitchen with my coat still on, and I did the arithmetic out loud, because it was the only thing that would hold still. I asked for this week off in October. I asked in October so nobody could tell me I asked late. I turned down a wedding dress, a 1958 satin gown, seams split up the left side. The woman wanted it ready for her anniversary in February, and it was $1,200 of work, and I told her I could not start it until the 2nd of January, because I was going to be with my family. $1,200, 6 nights, Aspen. I did not know what the trip cost yet. I found that out later, and I will tell you when I do, because the number turned out to matter for a reason that had nothing to do with money. My grandmother had stopped sorting. She was sitting with her hands flat on the dish towel, on either side of the buttons, watching me. "Aspen has good snow this year," she said. That was it. That was her entire comment on the subject. I laughed again. But this one came out wrong. More air than sound. "Grandma, did you know they were going?" I knew. When, October, I sat down across from her. The chair is the one with the split in the vinyl that catches your leg if you sit down too fast. It caught my leg. "Nobody told me?" I said. "No. They just left you here." She looked at me over the top of the steel glasses. "They left you here," she said. "I live here." That landed somewhere under my ribs and stayed there. I did not say anything for a minute. The furnace came on. Out the window, over the sink, the yard had gone completely dark, and I could see the two of us reflected in the glass. An old woman and a woman in a coat and a tin of buttons between us. "How many days are you staying?" she asked. "Through the weekend, maybe through the 27th. I have to open the shop on the 2nd. "Through the 29th, she said. "Grandma, they get back on the 29th. "I know when they get back." She said it very evenly. She picked up a button, turned it over, and set it on the pile with the heavy metal ones. "Stay through the 29th, she said. "That will be enough." Enough for what? I did not ask. I wish I could tell you I heard something in her voice that night and understood it. I did not. I heard an 83-year-old woman who did not want to be alone over Christmas. And I felt sorry for her. And I said, "Okay." I hung my coat on the hook by the washer. She went back to her buttons. I want to tell you about the other 3 times, because if you only have this one, you will think it was a bad week. It was not a bad week. It was the 4th one. Thanksgiving, 2019. My father booked 4 nights at Hilton Head. He announced it at the table in October, the way he announces things, with the fork still in his hand. Somebody said, "What about Grandma?" And my mother said Nora can stay. Nora's flexible. I am flexible. That is the word they use for a person who works for herself. I had asked for that Thursday and Friday off in August. I had a standing invitation from a woman named Deb who sells me thread to eat with her family in Marysville. I called Deb on the 19th of November and told her I could not come. My grandmother walked 3 miles every morning that week. I know because I walked the last mile with her on the Friday and she made me stop twice so she could talk to a dog. June 2021. The Pruitt girls' wedding in Cincinnati, 3 seats. My father works with her father. Margot went, and Peter went, and my mother went, and my father stood in the kitchen and explained to me that Margot was going because Margot was the one with the business relationship. I said that was fine, and it was fine, and then he said, and anyway, somebody has to be here Saturday for the roofer. The roofer came at 8 in the morning and was gone by 10:15. I sat in that house until 5 in the afternoon because he said he might come back, and he did not come back, and nobody called to ask how it went. August 2023, my parents' 40th anniversary. A dinner cruise on the Ohio River out of Marietta, 22 people. I was not told late, not told at all. I found out on a Tuesday because a woman who lives 2 doors down from my parents posted the pictures. My mother in the blue dress, my father with his hand on Margot's shoulder, a cake with 2 candles shaped like a 4 and a 0. 22 people. And I counted them, and I counted them again. And there was an empty chair at the end of the second table with a napkin still folded on the plate. And I have never found out who that chair was for. I did not say anything to anyone. I put my phone face down on the cutting table and I finished a pair of trousers. That is 3. This was 4. There is a version of me that would like to say I fought about it. I did not fight about any of them. Not once. I want to be honest with you about that, because otherwise the rest of this is a story about a woman who finally snapped. And it is not that. Here is what I actually did each time. I said okay. I said it fast. Before anyone had to ask twice, because the asking twice was the part I could not stand. Then I went home and I worked. 2019. I rebuilt the lining of a 1940s overcoat over that Thanksgiving weekend. 2021 I did the quilt. 2023. The August week. I reorganized my entire thread wall by color and then by weight, which took 11 hours and did not need doing. That is what I have instead of fights. I have a very well-organized shop. Now here is the thing I did not let myself see until much later. And I am telling it to you in the order I actually saw it, because I think that matters. Thanksgiving, 2019. I had asked for those 2 days off in August, June 2021. I had blocked that whole week in April because a woman in Zanesville wanted her mother's quilt rebacked and I was going to do it at the house. August 2023. I had told my mother on the phone in May that the second week of August was the only week I could travel all year. December 2023. I had asked in October, 4 times, 4 different reasons. 4 weeks I had cleared. Out of maybe 6 weeks I cleared in 5 years. You can call that a coincidence. I called it a coincidence for a long time. I called it a coincidence sitting on the back step of that house on the night of the 22nd with my coat back on and the cold coming up through the concrete. And I have thought about it more or less every day since. The back step is where I go. It has been where I go since I was old enough to want to be outside of a room. The yard was frozen hard. There is a maple out there my grandfather planted, and past it the fence, and past the fence the Rasmussen's security light that has been aimed wrong since 2008. I sat there long enough that my hands stopped hurting and started to feel like something else. I thought about calling somebody. I went through the list. Deb, who would have said come here right now, and who I had canceled on twice. A woman named Priya I went to school with, who has 3 kids and a job. A man I had dated for 11 months in 2021, who had told me, on his way out, that I was the most patient person he had ever met, and that he did not mean it as a compliment. I did not call anyone. I sat on the step in the dark doing math about weeks. Then the kitchen light went on behind me and the door opened about a hand's width. "Nora, I'm out here. I can see that. Come in." "I want you to look at something for me." She had it laid over the back of the chair. A man's wool coat, dark brown, the heavy kind nobody makes anymore, with a half belt across the back and horn buttons down the front. "That was your grandfather's," she said. "The shoulder's gone. I picked it up. It weighed what a coat like that weighs, which is more than people expect. Melton wool, felted, probably 20 ounce. The collar was worn through to the canvas on the left side where a man's chin sits year after year. The right shoulder seam had let go for about 4 inches. Can you fix it? I have been asked that question by strangers 1,100 times. I had never once been asked it by anybody in my family. I want to be careful here because it sounds small. She asked me to fix a coat. That is all that happened. But I had been in that house for 2 hours and it was the first sentence anybody had said to me that was about a thing I could do. "Yes," I said. Tonight. She moved the buttons over. I got my roll out of the car, unrolled it on the towel, and turned the lamp so it came down over my hands instead of into my eyes. Then I looked at the coat properly, which is a different thing from looking at it. Here is what I do. I go along the seam with my thumb first, because your thumb finds the stiff places before your eye does. Then I turn it inside out. Then I get the loop. The shoulder had not torn. That is the first thing. Wool, that heavy, does not tear at the shoulder. The thread had gone. Somebody had sewn that seam with cotton thread, and cotton dies in about 40 years, and it had died all at once the way it does. The second thing I found was a repair, down inside the left sleeve, at the elbow. There was a patch, not a factory patch. Somebody had cut a piece from the inside of the hem, which is what you do when you have no matching wool, and you are not going to buy any, and had set it in by hand. The stitches were wrong, too big, and uneven, and the person had gone around twice in some places because they did not trust the first pass. The thread was brown, and the wool was brown, but not the same brown, and whoever did it had not turned the raw edge under, so it had frayed inside the sleeve for decades. It was terrible work. It had held for what looked like 50 years. Who patched this elbow? She did not look up. I did. When, 1974, he came home with it torn on a loading dock, and I was not going to have him going out looking like that. "You could have taken it somewhere." "We had $91 in the account that month," she said. "I remember because I did the account. I sat there with my thumb on her stitches." "Grandma." "These are bad. I know they're bad. They held for 50 years. "Well," she said, "so did I." She said it flat, without any weight on it at all, and went back to the buttons, and I put my head down and started picking out the shoulder seams so she would not see my face. I worked for about 40 minutes. She sorted. Neither of us said anything, and it was the most comfortable I had been in a room with a relative in 10 years. If you have never watched somebody pick out a seam, it is slower than you think. You go from the inside. You lift 1 stitch with the point of the ripper, cut it, move down 3, cut, move down 3. You never run the blade along the line, no matter how much you want to, because the blade does not know the difference between thread and cloth, and the cloth is the part you cannot replace. I have said that sentence out loud to about 40 customers over the years. Thread is replaceable. Cloth is not. I did not think of it as a thing about people until much later, and even now I try not to say it that way, because it sounds like something off a sign in a gift shop. At some point she got up and made tea without asking whether I wanted any, and set a cup down at my elbow, on a coaster, 3 inches from where my hand was going to land. Then she sat back down. Nobody in that house had put a cup of tea at my elbow since I was 19 years old. Around 9, I asked her about the tin. You've been at that all day. What are they from? Uniforms? Hours? Hours. The company launders and rents work clothes. That is what Keegan Linen and Uniform does and has done since 1971. Cooks' whites, mechanics' shirts, lab coats, the mats inside restaurant doors. Garments come in, get washed, go back out, and when one is too far gone, it gets pulled off the route and scrapped. Every one that got scrapped, she said. I took a button off first. For how long? 40 years. I looked at the tin, then at the 4 piles, then back at the tin. Grandma, that's thousands of buttons. I don't know how many. You never counted them. She lifted her chin a little. I did not count buttons, she said. I counted other things. I laughed and asked her what she meant, and she picked up another one and held it near the lamp and did not answer me. I have gone back over that exchange more times than I can tell you. At the time I heard an old woman being cute. What she had actually just told me, on the 22nd of December, sitting at her own kitchen table with her hands full of other people's buttons, was the entire shape of what was going to happen for the next 15 months. I finished the shoulder at 10:40. I set the coat over the chair back and washed my hands at the sink. Tomorrow, she said, we go out to the plant. The plant sits on 8 acres out on Ridge Mill Road, past the grain elevator where the county road stops pretending to have a shoulder. We went out the morning of the 23rd. She was dressed before I was. Navy cardigan, cream blouse, the pointed collar buttoned to the top, and she was standing by the kitchen door at 7:15 with her purse on her arm like a woman with an appointment. They're closed, I said. It's the 23rd. Sam's there. Sam Whitaker has run that floor for 22 years. He is a tall man who moves like the floor might be wet. And he has a burn scar that runs from the back of his right hand up under the cuff, from a steam press in 2006. He met us at the employee door with a coffee in each hand and gave one to my grandmother without being asked. Mrs. Keegan. Samuel. I have never heard anyone else call him that. The plant was cold and mostly dark, and it smelled the way it has always smelled, like hot cotton and detergent and something faintly metallic underneath. 2 lines were down. The big tunnel washer sat with its door hanging open like a mouth. She walked in ahead of us, and I watched her change. I do not know how else to say it. At the house, she is an 83-year-old woman who takes the stairs one at a time. On that floor, she walked the center aisle without touching anything, and she named every machine as she passed it. Not by model, by name. That's Ruthie's, she said, about a folder. That's the one we bought used out of Wheeling. Ruthie. Ruth ran that side. We went past the sort tables to the back, where they keep what they are not using. There was a shape under a canvas tarp against the wall, and she stopped in front of it and put her hand on it. Pull that off. It was a sewing machine, not a home machine. A heavy, flatbed industrial with a cast frame, a clutch motor bolted underneath, and a stand with a treadle plate worn shiny in one spot the size of a shoe. That's a walking foot, I said. It sewed every hem in this building for 30 years. Why is it under a tarp? It quit in 2016. Nobody fixed it. I got down on the floor beside it, which is a thing I do without thinking. And I could see right away it had not quit. The belt was fine. The needle bar moved. The linkage from the treadle plate had come off its pin, and the pin was lying in the bottom of the stand where it had fallen. And it had been lying there for 7 years. I told her that. She looked at the machine for a second. Of course it did, she said, and walked on. The old accounting office is a room off the 2nd floor landing with a window that looks down onto the floor. Beige metal desks, A wall of file cabinets in that green they stopped making. A wall calendar from 2011 still hanging on the nail. She sat down at the desk on the left like it was still hers. Samuel, bring me the payroll binder for 94. He went and got it. It took him 4 minutes. While he was gone, she said, without any particular emphasis, March of 94, we ran 206 people. Gross payroll for the month was $109,440.16. Sam came back and opened the binder on the desk and turned it around so she could see. She did not look at it. She was looking at me. Sam ran his finger down the column and stopped. 109, 440, 16, he said. I said something like, "How did you do that?" "I did it every month for 40 years, she said. "You don't forget the ones you did by hand." Then she opened the second drawer of the desk and took out a folder, and everything about the morning changed. She put 2 pages in front of me. The first was headed as a proxy. My name was already typed on it. Nora Elizabeth Keegan. It said that I was appointed to attend and vote at any meeting of the shareholders on her behalf. And it had a line for her signature and a line for mine and a place for a witness. The second was a notice of a special meeting of the shareholders of Keegan Linen and Uniform, to be held at 10 in the morning on the 28th of December, 2023, at the company offices. Purpose election of directors. At the bottom of the second page, in her handwriting, was a list of 4 names and 4 addresses with a certified mail number beside each one, and a date, December 22nd. Grandma, sign there. What is this? It is what it says it is. You sent these yesterday, before I got here. I sent them Friday morning, she said. The post office opens at 8. I looked at the 4 numbers on that list for a long time. My father's address, my mother's, which is the same address, Margot's, Peter's. They had left at 6. I took it out of my coat pocket. It is a plain black one with a fine point, the kind I use for marking a hem allowance because it does not bleed on cotton. I have carried the same one for years. Grandma, what are you going to do? She took the cap off and handed it back to me the right way round. Barrel first, the way you hand somebody a knife. I am going to do the thing I should have done in 2011, she said. Then she signed her line, and I signed mine. And Sam Whitaker signed as the witness with the pen still warm from my hand, and none of us said anything else about it. Do you have your pen, she had asked, that first night, before she said hello. I understood the question about 18 hours too late to do anything except answer it. We got back a little before noon. I made her a sandwich and she ate half of it and put the other half in the refrigerator on a saucer with another saucer on top, which is how her generation covers food. Then I did the thing I had been not doing since 4 o'clock the day before. I opened the app and I looked. My mother posts, my father does not. But he lets himself be posted. Margot posts in bursts, 4 at a time, and then nothing for a week. There were 11 pictures by that afternoon. My father on a green run with his poles crossed in front of him, squinting, a lift tower behind him. My mother in the lodge with a glass of wine and her boots off. Margot and Peter on a deck somewhere, both of them laughing at whoever was holding the camera. A picture of a plate. The captions were what they always are. Finally, worth it, family. I want to be honest about how I felt, because I think people expect rage, and I did not have any. I felt like I was reading about strangers who had rented my family's faces. I scrolled through all 11 of them twice. I did not react to any of them. I did not screenshot anything. I put the phone face down on the arm of the chair, and I sat there in my grandfather's coat, which I had finished and which fit me across the shoulders in a way that I have decided not to think too hard about. But there was one picture, It was the 9th of the 11, posted by Margot at 4:30 in the afternoon, our time. In it, she is standing in a hallway with a carpet that has a pattern in it, the kind of carpet that only exists in hotels. And she is holding a folder against her chest. She is not in ski clothes. She is in a charcoal jacket and a shell and low heels. Behind her, out of focus, there is a sign on an easel. White board, dark lettering, the kind they put outside a function room. You can read about 4 words of it if you turn your head. And I did turn my head, and I read them, and they meant nothing to me on the 23rd of December. The caption said, "Not all of us are on vacation." 9 people laughed at it. One of them was my father. I remember thinking that it was strange she brought a work jacket to a ski trip, and then I remember thinking that Margot is the kind of person who would bring a work jacket anywhere. And then I put the phone down and I did not look at that picture again for 6 months. That is the whole of it. That is the entire moment. A woman in a hallway with a folder. I have thought since about how much of a life turns on whether you enlarge a photograph. At 4:15, the house phone rang. We still have one. It is on the wall by the pantry door with a cord long enough to reach the table, because my grandmother put it in 1982 and nobody has ever been allowed to take it out. She answered it. Hello. Yes, Ruth. I was at the sink. I could hear the shape of the other voice, but not the words. No, they went out west. Yes, the whole crowd. A pause. Nora is here. Another pause. Longer. She's standing right there. Then, I'll tell her. You too. All right. Goodbye. Ruth. She hung up. Who was that Ruth Ochoa? The Ruthie from the folder. The same. What did she want? She calls it Christmas. Every year since I stopped going in. That's 11 years, 12, she said. She called the year I was in the hospital too. I asked what Ruth had said about me, because she had clearly said something about me. She said to tell you hello. That was not what she had said. I knew it then, and I know it now. From the way my grandmother's voice went down at the end of the sentence, which is the same thing her son does when he is finished with a subject. That call lasted about 30 seconds. It cost nothing. Nobody in that kitchen thought anything of it. 11 months later, a woman I had never met opened her front door in the east end of Zanesville, looked at me, and said she had been waiting 13 years for somebody to knock. I have gone back over that afternoon 100 times. The picture I did not enlarge, and the phone call I did not ask about. People ask me whether I was suspicious that week. They want a moment where the hair went up on my arms. There was not one. I was tired. When you have spent 10 years being the one who gets left, you do not walk around looking for conspiracies. You walk around trying not to take up space. That is the part I would go back and change. If I could change one thing, not the trip, not the note, I would go back and make myself curious a year earlier. I made dinner that night out of what was in the refrigerator, turkey and cheese and the carrots, and I found a can of soup in the pantry behind a bag of flour that had a date on it from when my grandfather was alive. She ate all of the soup and told me it was too salty, which it was. Both of them were sitting right there in front of me on the 23rd of December, in the same hour, in the same room, and I let both of them go by. You should call somebody, my grandmother said, later, out of nowhere. Who a friend? It is Christmas. You should not spend it with me. There's nobody expecting me. She did not say anything for a while. Then it is a good thing you came, she said. Christmas morning it snowed about an inch, which in that part of Ohio is enough to make everything look forgiven. We did not do presents. She said she had not bought anything, and I said neither had I, which was a lie. I had brought her something and left it in the trunk, because after I counted 9 packages under that tree, I could not make myself go get it. I still have it. It is a pair of scissors. I cooked. There was not much to work with, so it was chicken thighs and potatoes and the carrots, and I made gravy from the pan. And she set the table for two with the everyday plates and then got up and changed them for the good ones. "It's just us," I said. "That is why. We ate at 1 o'clock. Neither of us said grace. My grandmother has not said grace since 1990, and when I asked her about it once, she said God knows what she thinks and the two of them have an understanding. After, she made me bring the coat. I had finished the shoulder 2 nights before. She turned it over on the table, found the place, and ran her thumb along the seam the way she had watched me do it. You can't see it. You can if you know where to look. Where I showed her. 2 inches of new thread, slightly brighter than the rest, and the way the nap lies a little different where I pressed it. She said. Then she pulled the tin over. She took the lid off and went through it with 2 fingers, not looking for long, and came out with a button, brass, 4 holes, a little bigger than the horn ones on the coat, and worn on one edge like a coin. "Sew that on the inside," she said, "where, left side, under the lapel where it folds, nobody will see it." "Grandma, it doesn't match." "I know it doesn't match. I did it. It took 4 minutes. She watched all 4. Whose was it? It came off a fry cook's jacket at a diner on Maple that closed in 1988, she said. The man's name was Delbert. He worked in it 11 years and it came in filthy every single week and he always tipped the driver at Christmas. I sat there with the needle still in my hand. "That's why you keep them." "I keep them because they were on somebody," she said. Then she told me about 71. I had heard pieces of it my whole life. I had never heard her tell it start to finish, and she told it that afternoon at the same table where it happened, which I do not think was an accident. She was 31. My grandfather was 34 and had been laid off from a foundry. They had a plan to lease 1 steam tunnel and 2 dryers and run linens for 3 restaurants and a motel out on the highway. The bank would not talk to her. Would not lend. Would not talk. She went in with the numbers written out and the man asked whether her husband was coming. So she sold her car, a 1966 Impala green, which she says she loved more than any object she has ever owned. $850. That was the down payment on the first press. "And I did the books on this table," she said, "right here, every night after supper for the first 9 years until we could afford the office." And Grandpa ran the floor. Walter ran the floor. Walter was very good with people. And I was the one who knew what everything cost. She said the next part without any change in her voice at all, which is why it took me a second. For 20 years, every customer who called this house asked to speak to the owner, and I would say, "Speaking," and they would say, "No, the owner," and I would put my hand over the phone and go get Walter, and Walter would pick up and say exactly what I had just told them, and they would say thank you. That is what I needed. The furnace came on. Did that make you angry? It made me careful. That is not what I asked. She looked at me over the glasses, and something moved in her face, and for about 1 second I saw a woman I had never met. "I have been angry once," she said. "Properly angry. 1994. "What happened in 94? That is not a Christmas story. Grandma?" "No," she said. "Not today." She got up and put the kettle on, and that was the end of it. And I let it go. Because it was Christmas. And because she had just sewn a dead fry cook's button into my grandfather's coat, and I was not going to push a woman who had done that for me. We watched something on television that neither of us followed. Around 4, she fell asleep in the chair with her chin down, and I sat across from her and looked at her hands. They are not soft hands. The nails are cut straight across, and there is a callus on the side of the right middle finger that I know is from a pen, because I have one in the same place from a needle. I thought about how nobody had called. Not on the 24th, not on the 25th. My mother had not called her own mother-in-law on Christmas Day. I did not know yet that this was going to matter. It did. When the lawyers went through it afterward, the thing that closed the door was not anything clever. 4 people were mailed a notice on the 22nd, and not one of them picked up a telephone in 7 days to ask anybody at that address a single question. At about 6, she woke up, looked at the clock, and said, "3 more days and you will understand." I asked her 3 more days until what? She said, "Until the 28th. The 26th and the 27th were the 2 quietest days of my adult life." I cleaned. Not because anybody asked, because the alternative was sitting. I started in the back closet under the stairs, which has not been emptied since my grandfather died in 2009. Christmas lights in a grocery bag, a vacuum with no hose, 9 paint cans, all of them dried out, a box of my father's high school things that somebody had taped shut and written Dale on in marker and never opened again. Under all of it there was a shoebox of photographs. Most of them were the ones everybody has. My grandparents in front of a car, a church picnic, my father at about 9 in a cowboy hat, scowling. Then near the bottom there was one of me. I am 19 in it. I know I am 19 because of the coat. It is a gray wool coat with a shawl collar that I bought at a thrift store on High Street in Columbus my first year of school and wore until the pockets tore out. In the picture the top button is missing and I remember that it was missing, and that I kept meaning to fix it and never did. Which, if you know what I do for a living, is a fairly good joke. I am standing on a sidewalk in front of a stone building with a wide door and 2 windows with bars, and I'm not smiling exactly, but I am close to it. My grandmother is next to me in her good coat with her purse over her arm. Somebody else took the picture. I brought it out to the kitchen. "Where is this?" She took it and held it out at arm's length, then brought it in, then out again. "Main Street," she said. "That was the bank. There's no bank on Main." "Not now. It is a pharmacy now. It was a bank until 2014. "What were we doing there?" She put the photograph down on the table and squared it up with the edge, which is a thing she does with paper. "Errand," she said. "Grandma, you were in school. I picked you up." "That's not an answer." "It is an answer," she said. "It is not the one you want." She went to the sink and ran water into the kettle, with her back to me, and I stood there holding a photograph of myself at 19 in front of a building I had no memory of ever entering. I put it on the refrigerator under a magnet. It stayed there for 11 months. I want to say something about those 2 days, because they are the reason the rest of this happened at all. I have been alone plenty. Alone is my normal condition, and I am fine in it. What I had not been in about 15 years was alone in that house with permission. Nobody came through to say I was in the way. Nobody moved a thing I had set down. Nobody walked past a job I was doing and said, "Oh, are you still on that?" By the second afternoon I had the closet emptied, the paint cans stacked by the garage for the county drop-off, and the hall light fixture down and washed. And my grandmother had walked past me maybe 9 times and had said exactly one thing about any of it, which was, "That fixture has been dirty since Reagan." I called my father again on the 26th. Voicemail. I did not leave one. I texted my mother in the afternoon. "Hey, does Grandma have a refill on the blue one? The organizer runs out Saturday." She wrote back at 8:40 that night. "There should be plenty. Check the drawer." "We're at dinner." I checked the drawer. There was not plenty. There was 1 week of the blue one, and I called the pharmacy on Maple the next morning and stood at that counter for 40 minutes on the 27th of December, while a very kind woman named Angela sorted it out over the phone with a doctor's office that was running a holiday schedule. Then I texted my mother one more time. "Do you remember what the 21st was?" She did not answer that one. Not that night, not the next day, not ever, actually. I checked the thread again a year and a half later, and there is nothing under it. The message just sits there at the bottom of the conversation with the little word delivered. On the night of the 27th, a car came up the drive at 7 o'clock. I looked out the kitchen window and did not recognize it. A dark sedan. And a woman got out with a briefcase and a wool hat and came to the kitchen door instead of the front, which told me she had been there before. "Harriet Boone," she said. "Is she in?" "She's in the dining room." "Thank you." She was in there 40 minutes with the door pushed most of the way shut. I stayed in the kitchen because it was clear I was meant to. I could hear the two voices, the rhythm of them, one long and one short, and paper being moved. At about 7:40, the door opened about 6 inches and I heard her clearly. And this is the only thing I heard the whole night. "You are sure about this?" Vivian and my grandmother said something I could not make out, and Harriet Boone said, "All right." And the door came shut again. She left at 8:10. She said good night to me by name, which meant somebody had told her my name. My grandmother came out and put the folder on the counter and stood there with her hand flat on top of it. "Tomorrow," she said. "Wear something decent." "Where are we going?" "The office, 10 o'clock. "Grandma, what is happening on the 28th? She picked up the folder and tucked it under her arm. "A meeting," she said. "It will not take long. The company offices are in a brick building attached to the north end of the plant. 2nd floor, 1 hallway, 4 doors, and a conference room with a long table that came out of a school. We got there at 9:40. Harriet Boone was already in the parking lot with her engine running. Sam Whitaker came in a clean shirt, which I had never seen. There was a 4th person I did not know. A woman named Dee Harold, who has been the corporate secretary since 2002 and who works 2 days a week and does the Minute book by hand. That was everyone. 5 people and a table that seats 14. My grandmother sat at the end where the chair has arms. She had the folder. She had her glasses on the top of her head and she brought them down when Dee opened the book. I sat on her right with the proxy in front of me in a clear sleeve. At 10:02, Dee Harold said, "It's 10. "Do we have quorum?" Harriet Boone answered. Notice was mailed certified on December 22nd to the address of record of every shareholder. 4 notices. 3 signed for on the 22nd. 1 returned unclaimed and remailed first class the same day. Present in person or by proxy, 62% held by Vivian Keegan. Voted in person, plus 0% held by Nora Keegan. Present as proxy holder. 62% is a quorum and is a majority. Dee wrote it down. I want to tell you what my hands were doing, because it is the only part of the whole 19 minutes I actually remember from the inside. My hands were flat on the table on either side of that clear sleeve, and I was pressing down, and I could feel the grain of the table, and I was thinking about the fact that my mother had signed for that envelope. I did not know that yet. I found it out 11 days later when the green cards came back. 3 signatures. 1 of them is hers. On the 22nd of December at 9:06 in the morning, in the handwriting she uses for forms. She signed for it and she put it on the pile on the hall table with the catalogs. And she got in the car and she flew to Colorado. The meeting itself was nothing. That is the part nobody believes. There was no speech. Nobody wept. My grandmother did not stand up and say a single word about her son. People want the moment where somebody is told. There was no moment where anybody was told. My father did not find out at 10:10. He found out at about 11:15 on the night of the 29th in his own kitchen, holding a piece of paper, and by then it was already 6 days old and had been filed with the state. That is what people do not understand about a thing like this. It is not a fight you win. It is a form somebody files while you are asleep in a hotel with the drapes shut. The other thing I did not understand until later is why she needed me there at all. She held 62%. She could have voted it herself in an empty room with D. Harold and the Minute Book. She did not need a proxy holder, and she certainly did not need me. She needed a witness who was going to be alive in 30 years. Harriet Boone read the resolution. The existing board was 3 people: my father, my mother, and a man named Ed Prather, who is 80 and lives in Florida and had not attended a meeting since 2019. The resolution removed all 3 without cause, which the code allows on a majority vote, and elected a new board of 3: Vivian Keegan, Sam Whitaker, and a woman named Denise Cobb, who runs a food service company in Newark, and who had already signed a consent to serve. "All in favor," Dee said. My grandmother said, "In favor." Dee wrote it down. That was the vote. That was the whole thing. 11 seconds, maybe. Then the meeting of the shareholders closed at 10 past 10, and the meeting of the new board of directors opened at 11 past 10 in the same chairs. And the new board took one action, and the action was to remove Dale Keegan as chief executive officer effective immediately, and to appoint Vivian Keegan as interim president. Bank signature authority was changed at 10:14 by a form Harriet Boone had brought with her. The company vehicle assigned to the chief executive was reassigned to the plant pool at 10:15. At 10:19, D. Harold closed the minute book and said, "Anything else? No." My grandmother said, 19 minutes. I signed the attendance page as proxy holder for Vivian Keegan. I used my own pen. It is a small thing, and I have thought about it a great deal. In the hallway, Sam stood with his hands in his pockets and looked at the floor and said, 22 years. "Sam, are you all right?" "He was going to sell it," Sam said. "Everybody on that floor knew. Nobody could prove it." I said, "Sell what?" He looked at me like I had asked him what color the sky was. "The company," he said. I looked at my grandmother. She was putting her glasses back on top of her head. "Grandma, is that true? Get your coat," she said. In the parking lot, the wind was coming straight across from the elevator, and it was the coldest it had been all week. She stopped at the passenger door and put her hand on the roof of my car and stood there for a second, and I realized she was steadying herself, and that she had been steadying herself since we walked out of that room and had timed it so that nobody inside would see. "Grandma, I'm fine." "You are not fine." "I am 83, she said. "Those are different things." She got in. I got in. I started the engine. "Now what?" "Now we go home," she said. "And we wait." They came up the drive at 11 o'clock on the night of the 29th. I heard the first car before I saw it, then the second, then the third, which is how that family has arrived everywhere for 15 years. 3 vehicles for 4 people. And there is a comment about it somewhere in my head that I have never said out loud. My grandmother was in the front room with a book. She did not get up. I was at the sink. They came in through the kitchen loud and warm, the way people are when they have been in a car for 90 minutes and the trip is over. My father had a bag on each shoulder. My mother was talking about the flight. Margot had her boots in her hand. "There she is," my father said, when he saw me. "Did you survive?" I survived. "Any beer in there?" That is the first thing he said to me. I had been in his mother's house for 7 days. "Bottom shelf," I said. He got one. He stood in the middle of the kitchen with his coat still on and drank about a third of it and looked around at his own house the way a man does when he is glad to be back in it. The mail was on the hall table where my mother leaves it. Catalogs, a card from the church, 2 bills, and the certified envelope she had signed for, on the 22nd still sealed, 3rd from the top. She picked the stack up on her way through, out of habit, and set it on the kitchen counter. And my father put down the beer and started going through it because he always does, standing up, sorting with 2 fingers. He got to the envelope. He looked at the return address. Boone and Tate. What is this? Nobody answered him. He opened it with his thumb, which tore it badly, and unfolded the pages. And I watched him read, I have thought a great deal about those 11 seconds. He read it twice. The second time he turned the page over as if the back would say something different. Then he said my grandmother's name. Not Mom. Her name. Vivian. He went through to the front room with the pages in his hand, and we all followed because you do. She had put the book down. What happened next went on for about 40 minutes, and I am not going to give you all of it, because most of it was the same 40 seconds repeated. He shouted. I had heard him shout before, at referees, at a dishwasher repairman, at Margot once when she was 19. I had never heard him shout at his mother. He asked her how long. She said since October. He asked her who helped her. She said, Harriet Boone. He said a lawyer, and she said yes, a lawyer. And he said behind my back, and she said, Dale. It was mailed to your house on the 22nd, and the second word out of your mouth to your daughter tonight was beer. That is the only cruel thing my grandmother said in the whole hour. And she said it in the same voice. She says everything. My mother sat down on the arm of the couch. She did not say one word. Not one. She sat there with her coat still buttoned and her hands in her lap, and she looked at the carpet. Peter stood in the doorway and did not come in. Margot was the one who asked the right question. She always is. She had not raised her voice at all. She waited for a gap, and then she said, Who signed the proxy? Everyone stopped. I did. I said. My father turned around. I am going to give you this sentence exactly, because I have heard it in my head more times than any other sentence in my life. He said. You sew for a living. Then he said the rest of it. That I had been in that house for 6 days. That I did not know what a root was, or what a root costs, or what 215 people cost. That I had never once, not one time, asked him a single question about the business. And here is the true part. He was right about that last one. I had never asked. Nobody had ever answered anything. So at some point I had stopped asking. But he was right that I had stopped. Then he said, And you couldn't even be bothered to come home for Christmas until the 22nd, I said. Whatever. It was the 22nd, and the day before that was my birthday. He stopped. I watched him do the arithmetic on his face. I watched him get to a number and not be sure of it. The 23rd, he said. The 21st. I thought it was the 23rd. He has thought that for 33 years. He has been sending the card 2 days late for 33 years. When he sends one. And I have never corrected him. And I corrected him that night in a room where everybody was already shouting. Which is a stupid place to correct anybody. My grandmother stood up. She said one sentence before she went up the stairs. Everything in this house that has my name on it has always had my name on it, she said. You just never read anything. Then she went up, one step at a time, with her hand on the rail. Margot followed me out to the porch a few minutes later, in her socks, with her coat over her shoulders. He's tired, she said. He didn't mean it. I did not answer. I'll call you next week, she said. You and me should talk, just us. I thought that was the beginning of something good. So that is 7 days, an empty driveway, a note under a salt shaker, a coat with a bad patch in the elbow, a tin of buttons off dead men's jackets, and 19 minutes in a conference room on the 28th of December that ended a man's career in his own mother's company. I drove back to Columbus on the 30th, and opened the shop on the 2nd and started the wedding dress I had turned down, because the woman called back and said she had not found anybody else. For about 3 weeks I thought that was the end of it. I thought the worst thing my family was ever going to do to me had already been done, and that I had come out the other side of it, and that from here it was going to be quiet. I was wrong about which one of them to watch. My father shouted. Shouting you can hear coming. Shouting tells you exactly where a person is standing. The one you have to watch is the one who calls you 9 days later, and apologizes, and gets every single detail right. She called on the 9th of January at 7:20 in the evening. I was at the bench with the dress on the form and my phone face down, and I turned it over and saw her name and let it ring 3 times before I answered. Which is a thing I do. "Hey," she said. "Is this a bad time?" "It's fine." "I can call back." "Margot, it's fine." There was a pause, and then she said, "I want to say something and I would like you to let me get to the end of it." I put down the pins. Here is what she said. I am giving it to you close, because the exactness of it is the entire point. She said, Thanksgiving of 2019, we went to Hilton Head and you stayed with Grandma. And I did not think about it for 1 second, not one. And I want you to know that I know the date. She said, June of 2021, the Pruitt wedding, 3 seats, and I took the 3rd one. And I told myself it was business. And it was business. And it was also my little sister sitting in a house waiting for a roofer. She said, August, the anniversary boat. And I stopped there. And she said, I know you were not asked. I was standing right there when it was decided and I said nothing. Then she said, and I am not going to bring up last month, because last month you did not do anything wrong. That was the part that got me, not the apology, the last sentence. She did not ask me about the proxy. She did not ask me what I had signed or why. She stepped over the only subject that anybody in that family cared about, and left it lying there. And by leaving it there, she told me she was not calling about it, which is exactly what she wanted me to think. Okay, I said. My voice did something on the 2nd syllable and I hated it. You don't have to say anything. I don't know what to say. Then don't. A breath. Dad's a mess. Nora, is he... He got up at 5:30 on the 2nd and drove to the plant and sat in the lot for 2 hours because nobody had told him whether he was allowed inside. Sam had to go out and talk to him through the window. I did not say anything to that. I am not proud of what I felt, which was nothing. And then a small mean satisfaction, and then guilt about the satisfaction, in about that order, and in about 4 seconds. Mom won't come downstairs before 11, she said. She's telling people at church that Grandma had a stroke. She's telling people Grandma had a small stroke in the fall and hasn't been herself. She said it to Judy Renner in the parking lot. That is not true. I know it's not true. Grandma is sharper than either of us. I know that too. And then Margot said the thing that made me trust her. And it worked because it was true. She said, somebody has to keep 215 people employed while the 4 of you figure out who hates who. And right now that somebody is me, and I have not slept since the 29th. And I do not have anyone to talk to about it because everybody I would talk to is a person I am angry at. Everybody except you, is what she meant. She did not say it. She let me hear it. I should tell you what I knew about my sister at that point, because it is not much. Margot is 5 years older. She is good at rooms. She remembers the name of your dental hygienist. When she is talking to you, you are the only one in the building. We had never had a fight. That sounds like a good thing. It is not. You do not fight with somebody you have no relationship with. In 33 years, the 2 of us had never once been alone in a car for longer than 20 minutes. So when she called me and got all 3 dates right, what I felt was not suspicion. What I felt was that somebody had been paying attention after all. For years. quietly, the whole time, and had been ashamed to say so. We were on the phone for 51 minutes. By the end of it, I had agreed to have lunch with her the following week. By the end of it, I had also told her, without being asked, that Grandma had been at the plant on the 23rd, and that Sam had been there, and that the paperwork had come from a lawyer in town named Harriet Boone. None of those 3 facts was secret. Every one of them was in the minute book. That is what I told myself afterward. And it is true. And it is also true that I handed them over in under an hour to a woman who had not asked a single question. When I hung up, my grandmother's number came up before I could set the phone down. She calls on Tuesdays at 8. Who were you talking to? It was busy. Margot. The line was quiet for longer than a landline is usually quiet. Grandma, I am here. She apologized. She actually apologized. She listed them. Grandma, she had the dates. You don't sound happy about it. I am 83, she said. I do not sound happy about anything. I laughed. She did not. Nora. Yeah. Keep the messages, she said. When she writes to you, do not delete them. Grandma, that's a little dramatic. Keep them anyway, she said. And then she asked me about the wedding dress. And we talked about a satin bias seam for 10 minutes. And she said goodnight. I did not delete them. That is the one thing in this entire story that I did right the first time. And I did it only because an old woman told me to on a Tuesday. We had lunch on the 17th of January at a place on Main called The Hearth, which used to be a hardware store, and still has the freight scale bolted to the floor by the register. She was there first, in the corner booth, on the side facing the door. She looked terrible, and it was the kind of terrible that is very hard to fake. No makeup on one eye, a blazer over a sweatshirt. Don't, she said, before I sat down. I wasn't going to say anything. You were going to say I look tired. You look tired. She laughed and put her head back against the booth, and for 1 second I liked her more than I ever had. Then she talked about the business for 40 minutes. And I want to lay this out carefully, because everything she told me that afternoon was true. That is the thing people do not understand about how this works. She did not lie to me at that table. She did not need to. She said 2 accounts had given notice in the first week of January, a regional restaurant group with 9 locations, and a surgical center. Between them, about 9% of the route revenue. Both had used the same phrase, a change in management, which in a service contract is not about management at all. It is about whether your linen shows up on Tuesday for the next 5 years. She said the bank had asked for updated financials outside the normal cycle, not a threat, a letter. But a letter like that means somebody at that bank had put the file on the top of a pile. She said if the operating line got pulled or even reduced, payroll would be the problem, and payroll is 215 people. And she said that number the way somebody says it when they have said it to themselves in the dark. Then she said, I am not asking you for anything. Okay. I mean it. Grandma's the majority holder. Whatever she decides, that's the company. I'm just trying to keep the doors open long enough for her to decide something. Margot, what do you actually want? She turned her water glass around a half-turn on the table. There may be a point, she said, where I need somebody in this family whose name is not on any of the last 20 years, to sign off on something boring, a consent, a certificate, nothing that costs you anything. Sign off on what? She waved her hand and did the thing where she took it back. Forget I said it. It's not fair to put that on you. You've done enough for this family for 1 winter. That is the sentence. Right there. That is the one that worked. I said. If it's something boring, I'll look at it. I'm not going to ask you, Margot. Nora, no, Really. Somewhere in there, she asked me about the shop. That was the second time in my life a member of my family had done that. And the first one had been 4 weeks earlier at a kitchen table. She asked what a restoration actually costs. I told her a 1958 satin gown with a split side seam and shattered silk at the underarm runs about $1,200. Because you are hand basting a new underlining and matching a bias grain that does not exist anymore. She said 1,200, and I could see her doing something with the number in her head, and at the time I thought she was impressed. She asked how many of those I get a year. I said 4, maybe 5. The rest is hems, zippers, work jackets, theater costumes in the fall. So what do you actually make? She said. In a year, I told her. I am not going to tell you, but I told her. She nodded slowly and did not say anything, and I remember feeling something I could not name, and the name for it was that she had just checked whether I could afford a lawyer. She paid. She would not let me see the check, which she framed as a joke about big sisters. Then, on the way out, with her coat half on, she said, "Oh, one thing, and this is my fault for not doing it in December." "What?" "The secretary needs a copy of your identification for the minute book. Because you held a proxy, Dee's a stickler and she flagged it. It's a records thing." She said Dee's name. She knew I knew Dee. I took out my wallet and gave her my driver's license, and she held it flat on her palm and took a picture of it with her phone. And then she turned it over and took a picture of the back. "Sorry," she said. "Both sides. Dee will kill me if I only get one." I said no problem. We hugged in the parking lot. She got in her car. 2 photographs, front and back, in a parking lot in January, in the open, at 11 minutes past 1 in the afternoon, with the freight scale visible through the window behind us. There is no version of this where I come out of that lunch looking clever. I have had 2 years of people telling me that they would never. And I have learned to say, I hope you never have to find out. But I will tell you the 2 things that I keep. The first is that everything she said about the company was true. The accounts left. The bank sent the letter. 215 people is a real number, and it is still a real number. The second is the photographs. She could have taken one picture of the front and asked for the back later. She could have asked me to text it. She did not. She took both, immediately, on the spot, standing up, before I could think of a reason to say no. You do that when you already know exactly what you are going to do with it. I drove back to Columbus and worked until 11 and did not think about it again for 145 days. Starting the first week of February, my grandmother started asking me to drive her out to the plant on Tuesdays. She has not driven since 2021. She gave it up herself, which is the only reason it was never a fight. The first Tuesday I asked her what she needed to do out there. "Nothing," she said. "Then why are we going?" "Because if I do not go, in a month nobody will remember to hold the door." So we went. Every Tuesday, 8:30 in the morning, and I closed the shop on Tuesdays, and it cost me money, and I did it anyway. She would sit in the old accounting office for 2 hours with the door open. People came up, not for decisions, mostly. A driver came up to say his mother had died. A woman from the sort tables came up to ask whether the company would still do the Easter hams. A man named Ortiz came up and stood in the doorway and said nothing for about a minute and then said thank you and left. And she said thank you back. And when I asked her what that was about, she said 1999 and did not explain. I mostly stood around. Then in the second week I stopped standing around because Elias Park found me. He is the maintenance tech. He is 36. He has a toolbox that belonged to his father with the name filed off and restamped. And he is the only person in that building who talks while he works. He found me in the back by the tarp. "You were looking at the singer." "It's not a singer." He stopped. "No," he said slowly. It is not. It is a juki. Nobody in this building has ever once known that. The linkage came off the pin. I know. You know, I have known since about 2018. He crouched down and pointed with a screwdriver without touching anything. Pin's right there. 5-minute job. Then why is it under a tarp? He looked at me for a second, deciding how honest to be with a Keegan. Because in 2017 I put in a request to fix it, and the answer that came back was that we do not do alterations anymore. We are a rental house, and if a garment is torn, we scrap it and bill the customer for a replacement. Who signed that? Your father. I did not say anything. It is not a crazy decision, Elias said, and I appreciated that he said it. Alterations are slow, scrapping is fast. On paper, it is a better business. On paper, he agreed. Then he asked me what I did, and I told him, and he did not laugh, and he did not say the thing people say, which is, oh, like a tailor. He said, so you would be the person who could tell me why the collars on the chef coats are failing at the neckband and not the fold. Nobody had ever asked me a technical question in my life, not one. I talked for 11 minutes. He listened to all 11 and then said, huh, and then went and got the pin out of the bottom of the stand and put it back on with his fingers. And the treadle came alive. At noon, somebody yelled that it was lunch, and the floor emptied into a room with 3 long tables. I did not want to go in. I went in because Elias held the door with his foot. There were maybe 30 people. Somebody's wife had made a sheet cake for a retirement that had happened in December and never got celebrated because of everything. Sam Whitaker sat down across from me with a sandwich and wax paper. He told me about 1998. The company's biggest account at the time, a hotel group, went under owing them $41,000. And payroll was on a Friday. And my grandmother came in on the Thursday night with a cashier's check drawn on her own account and paid it, and did not tell anybody. And the only reason Sam knows is that he was 20 years old and he was the one who carried the box of envelopes. She never said a word about it, he said. Not then, not since. You do not get that. No, I said. You do not. Somebody put a piece of cake in front of me and I ate it. A woman named Bernadette asked me if I was the one who does the wedding dresses. I said yes. She said her daughter's is in a box in a closet in Coshocton and has been since 2009, and the box has been rained on. I told her to bring it to me and not to open it first, because opening a wet box is how you set the stain. She wrote that down on a napkin. She wrote down what I said on a napkin, at a lunch table, and put it in her pocket. I want to be honest about what that room did to me, because it is the reason I did not walk away in June when walking away would have been easy. I had spent my whole life being the one who does not belong at the table, and I sat down at a folding table in a lunchroom that smelled like industrial detergent, next to a man with a burn scar and a man with his father's toolbox, and nobody there wanted anything from me. And nobody there had ever once made me explain why I do what I do. On the way out that afternoon, my grandmother handed me a key. That is the accounting office. Why do I need a key to the accounting office? Because when you want to look at something, she said, you should be able to look at it. I put it in my coat pocket. It stayed there for 4 months. I am going to give you the 3rd of April twice. Here's the first one. I opened the shop at 9. The gown was on the form in the back with a sheet over it. 1958. Ivory Duchess satin. Split down the left side seam from the waist to the hip, and shattered silk under both arms. Which is the thing that kills a dress like that. The fibers go brittle from perspiration salts, and then one day somebody lifts an arm, and 40 years of chemistry finishes at once. I photographed it before I touched it. Which I do with everything. 9 frames. My camera stamps the time into the file. 9:06 in the morning. I basted a new underlining into the left underarm by hand, in silk thread, which took until about 1. At 1:15, a woman came in with 2 pairs of trousers and I hemmed them while she waited. And she paid in cash and I gave her a receipt out of the book, number 4129, and the carbon of it is still in the drawer. At 2:40, I photographed the underarm again. 4 frames. At 4:10, the woman who owns the gown came by to look. Her name is Rosalind Vance. She stayed 20 minutes and cried a little, which people do, and I gave her the tissues I keep in the second drawer for exactly that. At 6:05, I locked up. There is a camera above the register. It is a cheap one that overwrites every 30 days. And it points at the door and the counter, and it records everything with a date burned into the corner. That is my 3rd of April. 9 hours in a room by myself with a dead woman's wedding dress. Now here is the other one, 55 miles east, at 10:15 in the morning, at a branch of Muskingum Valley Bank on Adair Avenue in Zanesville. A woman signed a continuing personal guarantee in the amount of $475,000 against the company's operating line of credit. The guarantee was for Keegan linen and uniform. The bank had asked for additional support on the line in February, which is exactly what Margot had told me over lunch. And which was true. The signature on that document reads Nora Elizabeth Keegan. Attached to the file was a photocopy of an Ohio driver's license. Front and back, license number, expiration, the little state seal, and a photograph of a woman with dark hair pulled back who is looking slightly to the left of the camera because I have never once looked into it properly. The notary block was completed by a notary who has since said, under oath, that a woman presented herself, presented identification that matched, and signed in her presence, and that she had no reason on earth to think otherwise. The document is time-stamped 10:15 a.m. At 10:15 a.m., I was sitting on a stool in Columbus with a threaded needle in my right hand and a length of silk organza across my knee. A continuing personal guarantee is a short document. Mine was 4 pages and most of the 4th page was blank. What it says, in the part that matters, is that the person signing agrees to be personally responsible for the debt if the company does not pay it. Not a portion of it, all of it. Not the company's assets. Hers. It does not expire when the loan is repaid. That is what continuing means. It sits there against every future advance until somebody revokes it in writing. I did not know any of that on the 3rd of April. Because on the 3rd of April I had never read one. I did not know about any of this for 69 days. That is the part that is hard to explain to people. There is no moment in April where I felt a chill. April was a good month. April was the best month I had had in about 6 years. I finished the gown on the 11th, and Rosalind Vance wore it to her 50th anniversary on the 20th and sent me a photograph of herself in it standing in front of a fireplace. And I printed that photograph and put it on the wall by the machine, where it still is. I went out to the plant every Tuesday. Elias rebuilt the tension assembly on the Juki, and I sewed 4 test seams on scrap, and the 4th one was perfect. My grandmother taught me to read a payroll register, which is a thing I had never thought about and which turns out to be the most boring and most useful 2 hours anyone has ever spent on me. She showed me the 4 columns that matter and the 2 that lie. She showed me how to find a person who is being paid outside the normal cycle, which she called a special, and which she said you look for by scanning the check numbers rather than the names, because a name can be anything but a check number has to be in sequence. I remember thinking it was a strange thing to teach somebody who fixes clothes. My father sent me a text on the 8th of April that said, "Saw a truck like your car. Thought of you," which is the closest thing to affection he has produced in a decade, and I looked at it for a long time, and every few days my sister called, and asked how I was, and told me what was happening at the company, and every single thing she told me was accurate. The 3rd of April, 2024, is the hardest day I have ever worked and the best work I did that year. It is also the day that cost me the most money of any day in my life. And I did not find that out until the 11th of June. And I want you to hold on to the fact that on the day it happened, I was happy. April and May were the months where everybody decided to be a family again. Margot got me invited to a board meeting on the 16th of April as an observer. I sat against the wall with a notebook. Denise Cobb ran it in 40 minutes and used the word margin 11 times. And I counted, because counting is what I do when I am nervous. My father started talking to me. It was not warm. It was the way a man talks to a coworker he has decided to stop having a problem with. He asked me once whether my car had been making a noise. It had. He said, "Get the belt looked at." I got the belt looked at. He was right. He was in the building most days. The new board had kept him on running operations, which is what he is actually good at, and I do not think anybody in that family has ever said out loud that he was better at it than he had been at the other thing. And on the 9th of May, my mother invited me to dinner. Just me. She made a roast. She asked about the shop and she listened to the answers. And she asked whether the neighborhood in Columbus was safe, and whether I had a dentist, and whether the lease was up soon. Near the end of it, she put her hand flat on the table, which she does before something rehearsed. And she said, "Nora, do you need anything?" I said no. She said, "Are you sure? Because if you needed something, you would tell me." I said I was sure. I said the shop was fine. I said April had been a good month. And my mother let out a breath. I want to be precise about this, because it is the most important thing that happened in the spring, and it took me 7 months to understand it. She did not look pleased that her daughter was doing well. She looked like a person who had been holding a bag over a railing and had been told she could put it down. She got up and cleared the plates and started talking about a woman at church whose husband had bought a boat, and she was cheerful for the rest of the night, and she sent me home with the rest of the roast in a container I still have. I have gone back to that dinner more than any other night in this whole story, more than the 28th of December, more than the night they came home. Because there was a moment in it, right at the start, before the roast came out, when my mother was at the counter with her back to me and she said, very lightly, "You know your grandmother is not going to be able to keep this up." And I said, "Keep what up?" And she said, "All of it. The company, the Tuesdays, whatever this is." I said something defensive. I said Grandma is sharper than the rest of us. And my mother said, "For now," 2 words, flat, in her nice kitchen, with her back to me. I heard concern. That is what a daughter-in-law is supposed to sound like about an 83-year-old woman. What she was actually doing was checking the weather. Meanwhile, my grandmother was getting worse. It started with a word. She would be mid-sentence, and the word would not arrive, and she would stop, and wait for it, and then go around it. That is normal. Everyone does that. Then, on the 23rd of April, she called me Ruth. We were in the accounting office, and she wanted the ledger from the middle shelf, and she said, "Ruth, hand me the one for 86. And I handed it to her, and neither of us said anything. And I decided it was nothing. On the 7th of May, she did it again. Same room, different ledger. The second time I said something. "Grandma, I'm Nora." She stopped with her hand out. "I know who you are. I know you do. I'm telling you what you said." She sat back in the chair and took her glasses off and put them on the desk. And for about 10 seconds she looked 83 in a way she never lets herself look. "Did I do it before? Once. 2 weeks ago?" 2 weeks ago," she said. "All right." She went to the doctor on the 14th of May. She drove herself, which she has not done since 2021. And I found out about that later, and it is the only thing she ever did in those 2 years that made me genuinely angry. She would not tell me what he said. She told me exactly 1 sentence about it. And she told it to me in the car in the parking lot of the plant on the 21st of May, with the engine off. "I have time," she said. I do not have as much as I thought." "How much?" "He does not know, and I did not press him." "Grandma, Nora." She turned and looked at me straight on. "There is a difference between a person who is dying and a person who is going to stop being able to sign her name. I am the second one. That is the one that matters here." Then she said the thing that I did not understand for 8 months. "If it comes to a day when I do not remember," she said, "then you go to the books. The books remember for me. Everything I ever knew about this family is written down somewhere in that building, in my handwriting, in order, by date. Written down everywhere," she said. "That is the point of doing it right." She got out of the car and went in and held the door for a man carrying a bin. And that was the end of the conversation. 21 days later, a letter came to my apartment in Columbus from a bank I did not do business with. It came on the 11th of June, a Tuesday, in the middle of a stack of nothing. Muskingum Valley Bank, commercial lending. My name and my Columbus address in a window. I opened it, standing at the mailbox with my keys in my teeth, the way you do when you assume it is a solicitation. It was a notice to a guarantor. I did not know that phrase. I read the whole page and I did not understand about a third of the words. But I understood 2 things. The first was a number, $475,000. The second was a sentence near the bottom that said the undersigned guarantor is hereby notified of an event of default under the credit agreement. And, beneath it, in a box, my own name typed out, Nora Elizabeth Keegan. Not Nora Keegan, the full one. The one that is on my license and on almost nothing else. I read it 4 times on the sidewalk. Then I went inside and sat on the floor of my apartment with my back against the door and read it a 5th time. And I want to tell you what the first feeling was, because it was not fear. The first feeling was embarrassment. I thought I had done something. I thought I had signed something in December in that conference room and not understood it, and that I was about to have to call somebody and admit that I do not know what I am doing. That is what 10 years of being told you are the one who does not understand the business will do to a person. My name is on a $500,000 document, and my first instinct is that it must be my fault. I called the number at 8 the next morning. A woman named Charmaine took it. I said I had received a notice and I did not understand it. She asked for the reference number. She read it back. She said, "Yes, ma'am. That is a continuing personal guarantee on the operating line for Keegan Linen and Uniform." I said I had never signed anything like that. There is a particular silence a person makes when they have heard a sentence before, and it is not the silence of surprise. She said, "Ma'am, I am going to be careful how I say this. The file shows an executed guarantee dated April 3rd of this year, notarized, with a copy of a state identification attached, front and back. April 3rd. Yes, ma'am. What time?" She hesitated. Then she said, 10:15 a.m. I was standing in my kitchen in Columbus and I could see the wall by the machine with Rosalind Vance's photograph on it. And I said, out loud, to a stranger on a telephone, "On the 3rd of April at 10:15 in the morning, I was 55 miles from your bank with a needle in my hand, and there is video of it," Charmaine said very quietly. "Ma'am, you are going to want to speak to somebody today." I asked her one more thing before I hung up. I asked who had signed it besides me. She said the company signature was Margot Keegan-Voss, Chief Financial Officer, which was expected and normal, and then she said the guarantee had been brought in already prepared by counsel, and I asked which counsel, and she said she was not able to discuss that, and the way she said it told me she knew and that she was sorry. I closed the shop. I put a sign on the door that said, "Family Emergency," which I have never done before or since, And I drove to Zanesville, and I do not remember any of the drive. I did not go to my parents' house. That is worth saying. I did not consider it for 1 second. I went straight to my grandmother's kitchen door and let myself in with the key she gave me in February. She was at the table. I put the letter down in front of her, and I did not say anything, because I did not trust the first thing that was going to come out. She put her glasses on. She read it the way she reads everything, which is slowly, with one finger under the line. She got to the bottom. She turned it over to check the back, which was blank. She turned it back. Then she asked me one question. And I have thought about the shape of that question ever since. She did not ask whether I had signed it. She did not ask whether I had done something stupid. She did not ask whether the bank had made a mistake. She said, "Where were you on the 3rd of April? At the shop. All day. 9 to 6. Alone." Rosalind Vance came at 4:10. A woman came in at 1:15 and paid cash. There's a receipt. There's a camera over the register. How long does it keep? 30 days. She looked up at me. "Nora, today is the 12th of June. I had not done that arithmetic yet. I did it standing at her table. The 3rd of April was 70 days back. The camera had written over it twice. I sat down. I put my hands flat on the table, on either side, the way I had in that conference room in December. "Grandma, it's gone." "The camera is gone," she said. "You are not gone. There is a difference, and I need you to hear it." She stood up, and she went to the phone on the wall, and she dialed a number from memory without looking at anything. "Harriet, it's Vivian Keegan. I need you at my house." Then she came back and sat down and folded her hands. "Tomorrow," she said, "bring the glass you use for looking at fabric." Harriet Boone had a copy of the executed guarantee by 10 the next morning. She would not tell me how. She said the bank produces documents to a named guarantor on request, and that she had asked in writing at 4 o'clock the previous afternoon. We did it in the old accounting office, because that is where the light is good and the desk is long. There were 4 of us. Harriet Boone, my grandmother, Sam Whitaker, and me. Harriet put the guarantee face up under the window. Then she laid out beside it 3 documents with my real signature on them, which I had brought. The lease on my shop, signed August of 2019. The attendance page from the special meeting, signed the 28th of December. And the back of a photograph, where I had written my name and a date when I was 26, because a customer had asked me to sign the picture of a coat I had rebuilt for her. 3 real ones and one that was not. I got out the loop. It is a 10 power on a folding brass barrel, and it lives in my apron pocket, and it has been in my pocket for 11 years. Everybody expects me to say I recognized it instantly. I did not. My signature and that signature look alike. That is what a good forgery is. If it looked wrong, nobody would have taken it at a bank. What I did was what I do at a bench. You do not look at a garment. You look at one thing at a time, in order. And you make yourself finish each one before you go to the next. Because the eye wants to jump to the interesting part, and the interesting part is almost never where the answer is. So, I started at the N. Here is the thing about a handmade line. And it does not matter whether the hand is holding a needle or a pen. A person stops. Not on purpose. There are places in any stroke where the hand has to change direction. And at those places a real hand slows down and there is a tiny thickening. A pool, where the tip sat for the length of a breath. I can show you the same thing in a seam. Hand sewing has a rhythm, and every 10 or 12 stitches a person shifts their grip. And if you turn the work over, you can see where, because the stitch on either side of the shift is a hair longer. Machine work does not do that. A person copying does not do it either, because a person copying is drawing, not writing, and drawing is continuous. They are trying not to stop. They are trying to get across the paper before their hand shakes. That signature had no stops in it. It ran from the end to the end without a single pool. It was, and I mean this as a technical description and not an insult, beautifully done. Then I got to the last letter. I sign with a downstroke on the final G and I stop. Flat. I have signed that way since I was about 20. And the reason is that I have a tendon problem in the right wrist from the work, and a loop at the end of a signature means rotating the wrist outward, and I stopped doing it because it hurt. The signature on the guarantee had a loop, a small one, a little return that curls back under and up. It is the way I signed my name at 19. It is exactly the way I signed my name at 19. I put the loop down and I said, out loud. She used an old one. Sam said, "What? There's a loop. I don't loop. I stopped looping in about 2011. Harriet Boone leaned over and looked at the 4 documents in a row and said the thing that made it real. The lease is 2019. The Minot book is last December. Neither of them has the loop. She put a finger next to the 4th one. What is the date on the photograph? 2017. No loop. No loop. She straightened up. Then whoever prepared this had a specimen that is older than 2017, she said. Where would somebody find your signature from before that? I did not know. I said I did not know. And then I did know. And it took about 4 seconds. And I did not say it out loud in that room because I could not get it past my teeth. Christmas cards. My mother keeps them. She has kept every card anybody in that family has ever sent. In shoeboxes, in the closet, in the sewing room, sorted by year with a rubber band around each year. She showed them to me once when I was in my 20s, and I thought it was the saddest and sweetest thing I had ever seen. I signed a card every December from the time I could write until about 2014, when I stopped going home for Christmas Eve and started mailing them instead, and then stopped mailing them too. Somewhere in that closet there are 25 specimens of my signature in date order with a rubber band around each year. My grandmother had not said one word in 20 minutes. She got up and went to the file cabinets along the wall, the green ones, and she opened the 2nd drawer of the 3rd cabinet without looking at the labels, and she took out a binder, and she carried it over and set it down and opened it flat. Payroll register. April of 2024. Nora, she said, do not read the names. Read the check numbers. I ran my finger down the column the way she had taught me in the spring. The numbers go in sequence, 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 and then a gap, and then one number sitting off on its own line at the bottom of the page, under a heading that said Special Disbursements. One entry, dated the 4th of April, 2024, Payee Voss, P. That is a day after, Sam said. Nobody answered him, because nobody had to. Harriet Boone turned to the last page of the guarantee. There is a block down there that nobody reads. It lists the parties. And beneath that it lists any related transaction the instrument is given in connection with. There was a line in it, one line, in the smallest type on the page, given in connection with that certain letter of intent dated January 19th, 2024, by and between the borrower and Harlow Fenn Textile Services, LLC, a Colorado limited liability company. I read it twice. It meant nothing to me. Who is Harlow Fenn? A roll-up. Harriet Boone said. They buy laundries. Denver. They buy laundries. They buy about 4 a year. They have bought 9 in Ohio since 2019. I sat down on the edge of the desk. January 19th, I said. That's 2 days after she took me to lunch. Nobody said anything. No, I said. No, that's a letter of intent. That means it was already going before that. You do not sign a letter of intent on the 19th of January if you started talking on the 18th. No, Harriet Boone said. "You do not—" I got my phone out. I want to describe this properly because it is the single worst 4 minutes of the whole 2 years. And it happened in a bright room in the middle of the morning with 3 people watching me. I opened the app. I scrolled back, past the spring, past the winter, and there it was, the 23rd of December, 4:30 in the afternoon, the 9th picture out of 11. Margot in a hotel hallway. Charcoal jacket, folder against her chest. I pinched the screen and pulled it open, behind her, on an easel, a white board, and now, blown up to the size of my hand, the dark lettering was perfectly readable. Welcome. Rocky Mountain Textile Services Forum, Harlow Fen Hospitality Suite. Terrace level. I turned the phone around and held it out, and I could not say anything at all for about 10 seconds. Sam took it out of my hand and looked at it and swore, once quietly, and then apologized to my grandmother, and she said it was fine. The caption under the photograph, which had been sitting on my phone since December, said, "Not all of us are on vacation." 9 people had laughed at it. One of them was my father. Here is what I understood. Standing in that room on the 12th of June, and I understood all of it at once, which is not how these things usually go. That trip was not a vacation. That trip was scheduled around a conference in Aspen where the buyer had a hospitality suite on the terrace level, and the whole family went. And the reason the whole family went is that it looks like a ski trip when the whole family goes, which means the plan to sell the company was moving in December, before my grandmother did anything at all, which means the special meeting on the 28th did not cause any of this. It interrupted it, and which means the 4 words in my father's note were not about the mountains and the phone service. Don't call. Not don't call because we are relaxing. Don't call that week. Don't call that house. Don't call the office. Don't ask anybody where anybody is for 6 days, while the numbers get walked around a hotel in Colorado. I had been holding that piece of yellow paper against my chest for 6 months, as evidence that my family found me inconvenient. It was not about me at all. I was the least important thing in that sentence. I was a phone that might ring at the wrong moment. And then the last piece, and this is the one that made me sit all the way down on the floor of that office with my back against the file cabinets. If the sale had gone through in the spring, the company's operating line would have been paid off at closing. The guarantee would have sat there, unused, expired in practice, and nobody would ever have looked at it. The only reason a notice ever came to my mailbox in Columbus is that the sale did not close. The only reason the sale did not close is that a woman of 83 sent 4 certified letters on the 22nd of December. So the thing that saved that company from being sold out from under 215 people is the same thing that exposed the forgery with my name on it. Both. The same act. You do not get one without the other. I sat on the floor and worked that out, and then I laughed, and it was not a good laugh, and Sam Whitaker crouched down next to me with his forearms on his knees and waited it out without saying anything, which I have never forgotten. I do not know how long I stayed down there. My grandmother finally spoke. "Nora, they were selling it." "Yes." "You knew in October." "I suspected in October," she said. "I knew when the bank asked for financials outside the cycle in February. Banks do not do that on their own. Somebody in diligence asks them to." "You never said no." "Oh, why not?" And she gave me the only answer she ever gave me for that. And she gave it flat, without softening it. "Because I could not prove it," she said. "And in this family, a woman who says a thing she cannot prove is a woman who is confused." She closed the payroll binder. "Now we can prove it," she said. "That is the difference. That is the only difference there has ever been." Then she pushed the 4 documents toward me across the desk, the 3 real signatures and the one that was not. And she looked at me over her glasses. "So, she said. You decide. Decide what we do with it, I said. Don't you mean what you do with it? No, my grandmother said. It is your name on that page. It has never been my name on anything they took. It has always been yours. Margot called me on the 24th of June at 9 in the morning, which meant she had heard. Hey, she said, can we talk about this like adults? Yes, that surprised her. There was a beat. Good, because there's a version of this where it gets very ugly, and there's a version where it doesn't. And I would like the second one. So would I. Great. So here's what I'm thinking. The line gets paid down, that guarantee gets released, and the whole thing goes away. I will personally handle the pay down. You don't file anything. You don't talk to the board. And this stays inside the family where it belongs. When what? When does it get paid down? Over time. Nora, I'm not made of money. Okay, I said. Let's talk about it in person. Thursday, at the office. Another beat, longer. Why the office? Because that's where I'll be. She said fine. I want to be honest about what I did in the 6 days between the 12th and the 24th, because it was not brave, it was slow. I did not sleep much. I called Harriet Boone 4 times, and twice it was to ask a question I had already asked. I drove past my parents' house one night at 11 and did not stop. And I sewed. I finished 6 jobs that week. There is a thing that happens to my hands when the rest of me is not working, and it is the only reliable machine I own. Thursday the 27th, 10 in the morning. The conference room with the long table. Harriet Boone on my right. D. Harold at the end with the book, because D comes when there is a table. Margot came in with a folder and her keys in her hand, which is how a person says they are not staying. She stopped when she saw Harriet Boone. You brought a lawyer to a conversation with your sister? Yes. Wow. Sit down, Margot. She sat. I had 4 things on the table, face down, in order. I did them one at a time, and I turned each one over and said what it was and then stopped talking, which Harriet Boone had told me to do and which is the hardest advice anybody has ever given me. The first was the photocopy of my license, front and back, out of the bank's file. That is from the 17th of January in the parking lot of the Hearth. You took 2 pictures. I watched you take them. She said D had asked for it. D? I said, did you ever ask for a copy of my identification? D. Harold looked up from the book. She is 70 years old and has kept those minutes for 22 years, and she does not enjoy any of this. No, she said. The second was the guarantee, with the last page turned up and the line about Harlow Fen showing. The third was the photograph from Aspen, printed on paper, enlarged, with the easel sign readable. The fourth was the payroll register open to April, with the special disbursement to Voss. P dated the 4th, I said. One day after, Margot did not touch any of it. She sat back and looked at me for a long moment, and I watched her run through the options. And I watched her land. And what she landed on was worse than shouting. She smiled a little. You know what the actual problem is, she said. The actual problem is that a woman who has never had to make a payroll in her life thinks that keeping a company alive is a morality contest. Margot, 215 people. That deal was $31 an hour, retained management, 5-year commitment on the plant. That is what I got them. That is what I was in a hotel hallway for on the 23rd of December, while everybody else was on a chairlift. You forged my name. I saved their jobs. You forged my name. And that is when my sister said the thing that ended us. She leaned forward, and she stopped calling me Nora. And she used the name they used in this family for about 2 years after I left school. a nickname built out of the word scholarship, which I am not going to repeat because it is not a word I say. Then she said it a second time, with the little tilt on the end. D. Harold stopped writing. I did not shout. I want that in the record. My voice did not go up at all. I said, "No." She waited for the rest of the sentence. There was no rest of the sentence. "No," I said again. "That's it. That's the whole answer. I'm not settling it in the family. I'm not waiting for the pay down, and I'm not signing anything you bring me ever again." Harriet Boone said one sentence, and it was to the room and not to Margot. She said that the file contained an executed instrument, an identification copy obtained on a date the guarantor could establish, a related party disbursement on the following business day, and a guarantor who could place herself 55 miles away, and that those 4 things sitting in one folder is not a family disagreement. She did not tell me what to do about it. She has never once told me what to do about anything. She reads out what is in the file, and then she stops. Margot looked at her, and then at me, and I watched her understand that the room was not going to move. She stood up and picked up her keys. At the door, she stopped, and she said something I did not understand for 5 more months. "You should ask Mom what she thinks about all this," she said. "Ask her about 2011 while you're at it." And she left. What happened in July happened on paper. And it happened faster than anybody expected. And none of it felt like winning. On the 8th, Harriet Boone delivered a package to the bank and a copy of the same package to the board. On the 9th, the board met. I was not in the room. Denise Cobb called me afterward and read me the resolution over the phone, and it is 4 lines long. And the operative part says that Margot Keegan Voss is removed as Chief Financial Officer effective immediately for cause. D. Harold wrote it in the book in her handwriting, the same book that has my grandmother's marriage in it, somewhere near the front. Because that book goes back to 1971. On the 11th, the bank released the guarantee, not because they are kind. Because a document with a defective execution is worth nothing to them, and they wanted it out of their file faster than I wanted it out of mine. The release is 1 page. It came in the mail on a Saturday. I opened it standing at the same mailbox where I had opened the notice. 30 days later, almost to the hour. $475,000 off my name. In 1 paragraph. I sat down on the step of my building, and I did not feel relief. I want to say that plainly because everybody expects relief. What I felt was the specific tiredness of a person who has spent a month proving she was where she said she was. On the 16th, Peter Voss resigned as in-house counsel. He resigned on a Tuesday morning by email, 4 sentences, to the board. Harriet Boone had already sent a grievance to the state bar. She told me she was going to do it before she did it, and she asked me whether I wanted to be the one to sign it, and I said yes. And she said good. And that was the whole conversation about it. I do not know how that came out. It takes years. That is the part nobody puts in these stories. That most of it ends in a drawer somewhere with a case number on it. And on the 19th of July, Harlow Fenn withdrew. They did not withdraw because of morality. Denise Cobb explained it to me in about 4 sentences. A buyer's diligence file is a list of everything that could bite them later. And a removed officer, a bar grievance, and a defective guarantee in the same 12-month period is 3 lines on that list, and no buyer wants 3 lines. They sent a letter. The letter is polite. It says they are electing not to proceed at this time. 215 jobs stayed where they were. That is the whole of it. 11 days, 4 documents, and 1 telephone call from a woman in Newark. Nobody shouted, nobody cried in a conference room. My sister lost her job and her husband lost his practice and the company stopped being for sale, and every bit of it happened in the mail. My father called me on the 20th. It is the only time in this entire story that my father called me first. He did not apologize. I want to be accurate. He said, "I heard about the Denver people," and I said yes. And he said, "That would have been the end of the building. They close the plants, they keep the routes," and I said, "I know." And he said, "Well, then about 8 seconds of nothing. Then he said, "Your sister got out over her skis." And I said, "Dad, she used my name," and he said, "I know she did." That was it. He had to go. But he had said, "I know she did," out loud, on a telephone. And for my father, that is a great deal of ground to cover in one call. I did not tell anybody at the plant. I did not have to. By the Tuesday after, Bernadette from the sort tables put a hand on my arm on the way past and said nothing at all. And Sam had the Juki moved. He moved it without asking me. When I came up the back stairs on the 23rd, it was sitting in the corner by the window where the light is, plugged in, with a chair. Elias was leaning on the wall next to it with his arms folded, trying not to look pleased. "The belt's original," he said. "Do not run it hard until I get one." I sat down. "I want to tell you what I did on the 23rd of July, 2024, at 4 in the afternoon. In the corner of a room in a laundry my great-grandparents never owned and my grandparents built. I hemmed a chef's coat, a real one, off the root, size 52, with the neckband failing exactly the way I had described to Elias in February. It took 11 minutes. Nobody paid me for it. It is the best I have ever felt at the end of a piece of work. My grandmother came up at 5. She stood behind me for a while and watched the needle. Then she said, "Come down to the basement. The archive is under the office end of the building. Metal shelving, one aisle, fluorescent tubes with a bad ballast that clicks, boxes by year, 1971 to 2013, in her handwriting, in marker, on the end of every box." She stopped at the end of the aisle and put her hand on the shelf. "There is a file down here, with your name on it," she said. "Payroll, I never worked here. Not payroll. Then what?" She did not answer that. She was looking at the shelving and I could see her doing something with her mouth, the way she does when she is checking a number against itself. "Grandma, I know it is here," she said. "I remember putting it here. I am not certain of the year anymore." She turned and looked at me, and I do not think I had ever seen her frightened before. "Find it," she said. "Find it while I can still tell you what it is. So that is my sister. A hotel hallway in December. A photograph of a license in a parking lot in January. $475,000 on the 3rd of April. And 11 days in July that took it all apart on paper without anybody raising their voice. I thought that was the bottom. I had lost a week, and I had lost my name, and I could not think of a third item on that list. Here is what I had not worked out. Both of those things. I knew I had. I knew I had a week off because I had asked for it in October. I knew my signature was mine because I had been writing it since I was 6. You can only defend the things you know you own. The third one was different. The third one had been taken while I was 19, and it went on being taken for 14 years. And the whole time I did not know there was anything there to take. And the person who took it was the one who sat in that living room on the 29th of December with her coat still buttoned and said nothing at all. I went down on the 6th of August, a Tuesday, after she had gone up to sit in the office. The archive is colder than the rest of the building by about 10 degrees because it is half undergrade and there is no duct down there. It smells like paper and cold concrete and faintly like the detergent they used in the 80s, which soaked into everything and never left. One aisle, steel shelving, 6 shelves high, both sides, banker's boxes with the year in marker on the end in her hand, which has not changed in 50 years except to get slower. 1971 is at the far end by the wall. 2013 is by the stairs. I did not know what I was looking for. She had told me a file with my name on it, and she had not been able to tell me the year. And I had asked her twice more since July, and both times she had gone somewhere behind her eyes and come back with nothing. So I started at 2010, because I was born in 90, and 2010 is the year I turned 20. And that is the only logic I had. The boxes are not organized by subject. That is the thing about a real archive kept by a real person. It is organized by when the paper crossed her desk. So 2010 is invoices and payroll registers and a folder of letters about a zoning variance and a manila envelope of photographs from a picnic. It took me an hour and 40 minutes. It was in the fourth box, at the back, standing upright behind the hanging folders instead of inside one of them, which is how you put something in a place when you want to be able to find it by feel. A single legal folder, not labeled with a customer name or an account number, written on the tab, in her hand, in pencil, Nora. I want to tell you what I thought it was. I thought it was drawings. I thought it was something I had made as a girl that she had kept, because that is the kind of thing an old woman puts in a folder. And I remember being embarrassed at how much I wanted it to be that. Inside there were 4 pages. The first was a certificate of trust, executed the 14th of June, 2010, at a bank on Main Street in Zanesville that has been a pharmacy since 2014. Settlor Vivian R. Keegan. Beneficiary Nora Elizabeth Keegan. Trustee Colleen M. Keegan. Initial funding $185,000. The second page was the schedule. The third and fourth were the terms. The terms are 4 paragraphs, and I have them memorized now the way you memorize a phone number from childhood. The trustee may make distributions before the termination date for the health, education, maintenance, and support of the beneficiary. The trust terminates, and the entire remaining principal and income is distributed outright to the beneficiary when the beneficiary attains the age of 35 years. I sat down on the concrete with my back against the shelving. I was born on the 21st of December, 1990. I would turn 35 on the 21st of December, 2025, 16 months. I read the first page again, then again. Then I turned it over to check the back, which is a thing I learned from watching my grandmother do it in a kitchen, and the back was blank. $185,000. Put in a bank on the 14th of June, 2010, with my name on it. I was 19 years old on the 14th of June, 2010. I had finished my first year at Ohio University 3 weeks before, and I had never, not once, in 33 years, heard a single human being say one word about it. Not my mother, not my father, not at graduation, not when I left school, not when I was 24 and sharing an apartment with 2 other women and eating rice, not when I opened the shop with $6,000 I had saved and a loan from a credit union at 11%. There is a photograph on my grandmother's refrigerator. It has been there since the 26th of December. Me at 19 in a gray coat with a shawl collar and the top button missing. Standing on a sidewalk in front of a stone building with barred windows. My grandmother beside me with her purse over her arm. Main Street. That was the bank. Errand, she had said. It is an answer. It is not the one you want. I had walked past that photograph on that refrigerator, on my way to that coffee pot, 40 or 50 times since Christmas. I did not cry down there. I want to be honest about that too, because people always ask. What I did was take out my phone and photograph all 4 pages, twice, once flat and once at an angle so the paper texture shows, which is what I do with a garment before I touch it. 9 years of habit is a strange thing to be grateful for. Then I put the pages back in the folder, and the folder under my arm, and I went up the stairs. She was at the desk with the window behind her. I put it down in front of her. She looked at the tab, and then she looked up at me, and her face did something I had never seen it do. "I thought you knew," she said. "Nora." I have thought for 14 years that you knew. She told me her version first. I asked her to. Walter died in April of 2009. She was 68. She spent that summer doing what people do, which is going through a man's clothes and finding out what he kept. And in the spring of 2010, she went to see a lawyer, not Harriet Boone, an older man named Ferris who is dead now. And she set up a trust. Why? Because Walter left more than anybody expected, she said. And because I had watched your mother for 20 years by then, and I knew exactly what she thought of you. Which was what? That you were the one who was not going to amount to anything, she said. She never said it. She did not have to. You watch where a woman looks at a table. She put $185,000 in it. She named my mother trustee because she was 70 years old. And because Colleen had raised me. And because in 1971, a woman had sat in a bank while a man asked whether her husband was coming. And she had spent 40 years determined not to be the kind of person who assumes another woman is incompetent. That is the whole reason, she said. I did not want to be him. You could have named yourself. I could have named myself Grandma. I know, she said. I know exactly what I did. She took me to the bank on the 14th of June because she wanted me there. She would not tell me why yet, she said, because I had one more year of school and she did not want a 19-year-old walking around knowing there was money. She said she was going to tell me at graduation. And then in the spring of 2011, she said, your mother called me and said you had quit. I did not say anything. She said you had gone home in March and told them you were done. She said the coursework was too much and you had been struggling since Christmas, and that you had made up your mind and that nobody could talk to you. She said, and I remember this exactly. Vivian, she is not built for it. She said that. She said that on the telephone in April of 2011. And I was 70 years old. And I believed her. Did you ever ask me? She looked at me for a long moment. I asked you at Thanksgiving that year whether you were going back, she said. And you said no. That is true. I did say no. I have thought about that word a great deal. Now here is my version. In February of 2011, I came home on a Sunday because my mother asked me to. I was in the middle of my second year. I had a B+ average, and a work-study job in the costume shop of the theater department where I had been for a year and a half, and where a woman named Dr. Hollis had told me in December that I should think about conservation as a career. My mother came upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed. She had a cup of tea, and she gave it to me, and she held my hand, which she does not do. She said, "Honey, I need you to be an adult with me about something." She said the second half of the year was already paid, but the fall would not be. She said your father is carrying the plant, and there is a note on the building, and the bank has said no. She said we tried. We did try. Your dad went in and asked, and they turned him down. She said, we are not going to be able to do this. Then she said the sentence that has run in my head for 14 years. She said, And I am not going to let you take out loans, because you would be paying them until you were 50. And Nora, you are not the kind of person who does well with pressure. I said, okay. I went back on the Tuesday, and I finished the semester, and I did not register for the fall. I did not tell Dr. Hollis why. I told her it was money, and she said come back when you can, and I said I would, and I did not. I got a job at a place on the east side of Columbus that does hems and zippers for $9.50 an hour, and I stayed there 6 years. I told her all of that at the desk in the accounting office with the window behind her, and she listened to every word of it without moving. When I finished, she said one thing. There was no note on that building in 2011, she said. I paid it off in 97. We sat there, 2 women in a room with 2 stories. And the stories do not touch anywhere, and there is only one place where they could both be true, and there is nowhere at all where they both are. I did the arithmetic out loud, because that is what I do. In February of 2011, there was a trust with my name on it, holding $185,000. And the woman who controlled it was sitting on the edge of my bed with a cup of tea telling me that a semester of state school tuition could not be found. Tuition and fees at Ohio University that year, for a resident, ran under $11,000. She had 16 years of it in an account, and told me there was not one. And upstairs from where she was sitting, in a closet, there was a shoebox of Christmas cards with my signature on them going back to 1996, in date order, with a rubber band around each year. I had not put that together yet. It arrived about 4 seconds after the arithmetic did, and it arrived whole. And I said out loud, in that office, "Oh. Grandma, how much is left in it?" She stood up and went to the phone. It took 3 months to get a piece of paper. That is the part of this that nobody puts in a story, because it is unbearable to sit through. From the 6th of August to the 12th of November, the entire content of my life was letters. Harriet Boone sent the first one on the 9th of August. A beneficiary is entitled to an accounting. That is the whole legal architecture of it, and it fits in one sentence. And getting anybody to act on it took 95 days. The bank on Main Street closed in 2014, and its accounts went to a successor institution. And that institution had been bought twice since. The trust had been moved in 2016. Nobody could tell us to where for 3 weeks. Then a woman in a records department in Columbus found it. And then there was a form. And then the form was wrong. And then there was a different form. I kept working. I did 9 jobs in September. I do not remember a single one of them, and I have looked at the book to check. My grandmother got worse that fall in a way that had a shape to it. Mornings she was herself. By 4 in the afternoon she would ask me the same question twice, about 40 minutes apart, in the same words. She started writing things on index cards and putting them in her cardigan pocket. I found one of the cards later. It says, in her hand, "Nora knows about the trust. Do not tell her twice. She will be kind about it, and that is worse." On the 12th of November, the statements came. 51 pages. 14 years of a trust account, quarter by quarter, in the flat gray type of a machine that does not know what it is printing. Harriet Boone laid them out on the long table in the conference room and left me alone with them for 2 hours, which I have never thanked her for properly. Here is what a stolen life looks like when it is printed out. It starts on the 14th of June, 2010, with one deposit, $185,000. It sits for 11 months. Nothing happens. There is interest. The first withdrawal is the 22nd of May, 2011, $4,200. 3 months after a woman sat on the edge of my bed and told me the money was not there. Then there are 4 more in 2011 and 3 in 2012, all between $2,000 and $5,000, all coded the same way, which is a code that means the trustee certified the distribution was for the health, education, maintenance, and support of the beneficiary. I did not receive $1 of any of it. 2015 has 7 withdrawals. 2019 has one that is different from all the others. $31,400. On the 8th of July. My parents' kitchen was renovated in August of 2019. New cabinets, quartz counter, and the island with the second sink. My mother talked about that island for a year. She sent me a picture of it while it was being installed. 2021 has 2 large ones, in March and in May. Margot was married in June of 2021 at a place outside Granville with a tent and a band. I was at that wedding. I altered her dress. She asked me to, as a gift. And I did it for free, and I was proud to do it. And I spent 40 hours on it. And I let out the bodice a 1/4 inch on each side and shortened the straps and reset the bustle. 40 hours. For free. In the spring of 2021. Paid for out of my own account, by the woman who was taking money out of it that same month. I sat in that conference room and I did not shout and I did not cry. I did what I do. I got out a notebook and I made 2 columns and I went down the 51 pages line by line, and I wrote every withdrawal on the left with its date and amount. And on the right I wrote what was happening in that family in that month, from memory. And where I could not remember, I left it blank and went back later. It took me 3 hours and 11 minutes, and I filled 9 pages. I have thought since about the fact that this is the same thing an 83-year-old woman used to do at a kitchen table after supper for the first 9 years. And I did not think of that at the time either. The last page of the statements is the current one. Balance as of the 31st of October, 2024, $4,180. I looked at that number for a long time. Then I went back to the front, to the first page, to the line at the bottom of the very last entry of 2022, which I had skipped past twice, because there is a second signature on the withdrawal slips. Ohio banks want a witness on a trustee distribution over a certain amount, and somebody had signed as witness, and the same 3 letters and 1 name is on it 11 times. R. Ochoa. She lives on the east side, on a street of small square houses built for men who worked at the pottery works, with a porch across the front and a metal glider on it. I did not call first. I have thought about whether that was fair, and I have decided it was not, and I would do it again. The 20th of November, about 4 in the afternoon. Cold, and already going gray. She opened the inside door and looked at me through the storm door for a good 3 seconds. She is 71, short, wide through the shoulders, gray hair cut close, glasses on a chain. Then she opened the storm door and said, "You are Vivian's girl. I'm her granddaughter, Nora." "I know who you are," Ruth said. "I have been waiting 13 years for somebody to knock on this door. I did not have anything ready for that." She put me at her kitchen table and made coffee I did not ask for and set out a plate of shortbread from a tin. And she sat down across from me and folded her hands and waited. And I understood that she was not going to make me ask. So I did not ask. I put the statements on her table, folded open to a page with a witness line on it. She put her glasses on. "That's mine," she said. "That one and about 10 others. 11. 11. All right." Then Ruth Ochoa told me the thing I had driven across town for, in the plainest language anybody has used about any of this. She was the payroll clerk. She was in that building from 1979 to 2013. She was a notary because the company needed one on site, and the company paid for the commission. And in a small place, a notary in an office signs perhaps 300 things a year, and 290 of them are nothing. In May of 2011, my mother came in and asked her to witness a trustee distribution. "She said it was for your school," Ruth said. "She said it right out. She said, 'This is for Nora's fall semester. They will not give her a loan.'" The bank turned Dale down. "You believed her?" "Why would I not?" She said it without any defensiveness at all. She was the owner's daughter-in-law. It was $4,000. And she said it was for a girls' school. She signed it. She signed the next 3 too, over 18 months, without thinking about any of them. Then in October of 2012, she was at the counter at the drugstore, and she ran into somebody who knew my family. And she said something pleasant about how the girl must be finishing up by now. And the woman said, "Oh no, honey. Nora left school over a year ago." Ruth went back to the office the next morning and pulled her own notary journal. "Because we keep a journal," she said. "That is the law, and I have never once skipped a line in 34 years. 4 entries, all coded for education. The most recent one 6 weeks old. She went to my mother. I said, "Colleen, I have to ask you about the Nora distributions." She looked at me over the glasses. "And your mother said to me, 'Ruth, that is a family matter, and it is above your pay grade. And you should mind the payroll.'" Above your pay grade. Those words, standing at the copier. She never signed another one. She checked later, and my mother had gone to a branch after that with a different witness, sometimes a bank employee, which is allowed. "Why didn't you tell anybody she was quiet for a bit?" "I thought about it every week for 2 years, she said. "And I will tell you exactly why I did not, and it is not a good reason. I was 59 years old. My husband had been out on disability since 2008. I had 4 years to my pension, and the person I would have had to go to was Vivian Keegan. And Vivian Keegan is that woman's mother-in-law. And I have watched what happens in a family when the outside help brings a thing like that in through the front door." "So what did you do?" "I made copies," Ruth said. She got up, she went into the back of the house, and she was gone about 2 minutes, and she came back with a shoebox. Not a metaphor. An actual shoebox. Brown. From a pair of women's flats, with a rubber band around it. Inside were photocopies. Every instrument she had ever notarized for that family, and her journal pages for those years, and a single sheet of lined paper on top with dates and 1 line of description each in ballpoint, written all at once, in 2013, the week she retired. "I did not know what it was for," she said. "I knew it was for something." She pushed the box across the table. 13 years, I said. Ruth Ochoa shrugged, and she looked out the window at her own yard, and she said the truest thing anybody said to me in 2 years. "Nobody ever asked me a question," she said. "That is all it would have taken. One person, one time, asking me a question." Then she looked back. "Are you going to show your grandmother I brought the box to her on the 24th of November, a Sunday, in the morning, because mornings were when she was all there. I did not warn her. I set it on the kitchen table and took the rubber band off and lifted the lid, and I said, 'This is from Ruth Ochoa.' She read for 7 minutes. I know it was 7 because I watched the clock over the stove, and I watched it because I could not watch her. She read every page. She read the lined sheet on top last, which is the summary, and she read that one twice. Then she put her hands flat on the table on either side of the box, which is a thing I do, and I have never known which of us got it from the other. 'I want to say something,' she said, 'and I want to say all of it, and I would like you not to help me while I do.' I said, 'Okay.' In 1994, she said, 'Your father let 2 men go.' I waited. Renko and a man named Buell. 9 years on the floor and 6. It was March. We had lost the hospital contract, and Dale came to me and said we have to cut 2, and I said yes, we do. Then in June he bought a car, a new one, the first new car anybody in this family ever had, and I did the books, Nora. I knew to the dollar what the 2 of them cost us a month, and I knew to the dollar what that car cost. And they were close enough that I have never been able to unsee it. Did you ask him? I did. What did he say? He said, "Mom, that is 2 different pots of money." She looked at me. "That is not a lie, technically. Payroll and his draw are 2 different pots. It is the truest false thing anybody has ever said to me." She turned the lined page over and put it face down. "And I did nothing," she said. "I was 54 years old. I owned 62% of that company. I could have removed him from anything I wanted. In 1994, in 10 minutes, with the same forms Harriet used last December, "Why didn't you?" "Because he was my son and I did not want to lose him," she said. And I told myself that a mother who takes a company away from her own child is a monster. And I told myself that he would grow out of it. And I told myself that Walter would have wanted the family kept together. She stopped. All three of those were true. And all three of them were also the cheapest excuse available. And I took the cheapest one for 30 years. The furnace came on. "So I bought something," she said. "I bought 30 years of a family that still sat down at this table at Christmas. And I want you to understand, Nora, because I am not going to say it again, that I knew what the price was, and I paid it anyway." "What was the price?" she said. I did not say anything. "You were the price," she said. "Every single time. In 1994, it was 2 men on the floor. After that, it was whichever person in this house was easiest to take from. And by about the time you were 15, that was you. And I saw it, and I said nothing, and I kept coming to Christmas." She reached over and squared the shoebox up with the edge of the table. "And there is a thing I need to be honest about," she said, "which is that in 2010 I did not set up that trust because I am generous. I set it up because I already knew I was not going to open my mouth. It was money instead of a mouth. It cost me nothing to sign a paper at a bank, and it would have cost me my son to say one sentence at this table. And I picked the paper. That is the moment my grandmother stopped being a person who was rescuing me. I want to be careful because I love her, and because everything she did that year was real. But she did not step in when I was 15, or 20, or 26. She stepped in at 83, when she was starting to lose words and had run out of years in which to keep buying the other thing. She did not ask me to forgive her. She has never once asked me that. What she did was push the box across the table with 2 fingers, the same way she had pushed the 4 documents in June. "I have no right to decide this one," she said. "I gave that up in 94. It is yours." "Grandma." "What do I even do with it? Whatever you decide," she said. "But decide it, Nora. Do not do what I did. I did nothing for 30 years, and I called it keeping the peace. And there was never any peace. There was only a bill. And you paid it." Before I left that afternoon, I asked her one more thing, because I had been carrying it since the archive. I asked her why she had never told my mother that she had told me about the bank. Why she had let 14 years go by without one sentence, at one dinner, about a trust that had her own name on it as settler. She said, "Because I mentioned it once, when 2012, Easter. I said something to Colleen about how the account was doing. She looked at the window. And your mother said, 'Oh, we should not talk about that in front of Nora. She gets funny about money. She gets funny about money.' That is what she said. And I thought, that is odd. And then I thought, well, Colleen knows her own daughter. She took her glasses off. 'One sentence,' she said. 'It took your mother one sentence, one time, in the middle of a conversation about ham. It worked for 14 years, and it worked on me. I asked her for a week. I took the week and I spent it working. Because that is where I think. There was a dress on the form. Ivory silk file, 1952. Brought in by a woman named Marguerite Deal, who is 78 and who wanted it made wearable for her granddaughter in the spring. I never met the granddaughter. Mrs. Deal came in 3 times and did all the talking, and brought a photograph of herself in it at 22, and asked me twice whether the neckline could be raised. And it could. It is a hard job. The silk had gone at both shoulder seams and along the back of the neck, and there was a rust-colored line across the front waist where the dress had lain folded against a metal rod for 60 years. That line does not come out. I told her so on the first visit. I always tell them at the start, Because hope is expensive. What you can do is turn the panel. You take the skirt front off, rotate it so the damaged strip lands inside the pleat where it is hidden by the fold, and set it back. It takes 11 hours. Nobody who has not been told will ever see it, and the woman wearing it will always know it is there. I thought about my mother the entire time I did it. Here is what I worked out with a mouthful of pins, and I am not going to dress it up. There are 3 kinds of damage. There is the kind you can mend so that it is gone. A split seam is that. Thread failed. You were threaded. The cloth was never hurt. There is the kind you can only turn. The damage stays and you move it somewhere it does not have to be looked at, and the garment goes on being worn, and the person wearing it knows. And there is the kind where the fiber itself is dead. Shattered silk. You can put a new underlining behind it and stabilize it, and it will hold for one evening. And if you keep stitching into it, you will only make more holes, because every needle you put through it takes a little more of what is left. My father is a split seam. He is not a good man, and he is not a complicated one. And I could rethread that if I wanted to. And some days I want to. My sister is a turn. It stays where it is, and I have moved it inside the pleat. My mother is the 3rd one. I did not arrive at that with any peace. I arrived at it at about 11 at night on the 29th of November with my hands cramping. I want to add one thing to that, because I have heard people use this kind of talk to be cruel, and I do not want it heard that way. Deciding a piece of cloth is dead is not a judgment about the cloth. Silk shatters because somebody wore it. It goes at the underarm because a woman danced in it and sweated in it and was alive in it. The damage is not the fabric's fault, and it is not a verdict on the dress. It is only a statement about what more needles will do. On the 1st of December, I did something that had nothing to do with any of it. I drove my grandmother out to the plant on a Sunday when nobody was there, and I brought Ruth Ochoa. They had not seen each other since 2013. I had thought it would be awkward for about 10 minutes and then fine. It was not awkward for 1 second. Ruth came through the employee door and my grandmother stood up out of the chair without help, which she does not do. And Ruth said, "Well, look at you." And my grandmother said, "Ruthie." We sat in the old payroll office for 3 hours. I have almost none of it written down, and I have never been sorry about anything less. They talked about people. Just people. A man named Ferrante who kept a radio under the sort table. The winter of '78 when the pipes went and they ran the whole place off 2 boilers. A woman named Junie who worked 9 years and never once cashed a check on payday because she liked to carry them. Ruth said, "Do you remember when the hospital account went and you paid us out of your own account?" And my grandmother said, "I do not know what you are talking about." And Ruth said, "No, of course you do not." Elias came by because he had seen my car. He had not been invited, and he made no excuse for himself. And he fixed the radiator valve in that office while they talked, and then sat on the desk and listened for 40 minutes. At about 4, my grandmother lost a thread mid-sentence, and stopped, and put her hand up. And Ruth Ochoa, who has known her for 45 years, said, "You were on Junie." And my grandmother said, "Junie," and went on. That is the whole reason I brought them together, and I did not know it until it happened. I drove Ruth home at 5:30. At her door she said, "Have you decided?" "Yes." "You do not have to tell me." "You'll be in it," I said. "You should know that going in. If I do this, you will have to say all of it again, on a record, with your name on it." Ruth stood on her own porch in the cold, with her arms folded, and thought about it for about 4 seconds. "Good," she said. I called Harriet Boone from the car. I did not do it at a lawyer's office. Harriet Boone wanted to. I said no. The 14th of December, 2024, 10 in the morning, at the kitchen table. That table, The one she did the books on for the first 9 years. The one with the ceramic rooster that has never held salt that pours. The one where a piece of yellow legal paper had been sitting under it. 1 year less 8 days earlier. 7 people. My grandmother at the end where the chair has arms. My father. My mother, Margot. Harriet Boone, Ruth Ochoa, and me. Peter did not come. He was not invited. My mother arrived first, at 9:40, with a coffee cake, because she does not know how to enter a room without carrying something. My father came in and looked at Ruth and said, "Ruthie, what are you doing here?" in a voice that was actually warm. And Ruth said, "Hello, Dale." And that was the last friendly thing said in that house. Margot came in last and sat down without taking her coat off. I did not make a speech. I want that in the record too. I put 3 things on the table, in order, one at a time, and I said what each one was, and then I stopped talking. The first was the certificate of trust. 14th of June, 2010. Settler, Vivian Keegan. Beneficiary, Nora Elizabeth Keegan. Trustee, Colleen Keegan. $185,000. My father picked it up. I want to tell you about his face. Because it decided something for me. He read it. And he did not understand it. And then he did. And what came into his face was not guilt. It was the specific blankness of a man discovering there has been a room in his own house that he has never been in. "What is this?" he said. "It's a trust," Harriet Boone said. "It was funded in 2010. For what? For your daughter." He turned to my mother, not angry yet, confused. "Call, did you know about this?" She did not answer him. The second thing was the statements. 51 pages. I put them down and turned them so they faced her, and I said, "That is the account." The third was Ruth's shoebox. I took the lid off and left it off. Then I sat down. My mother did not touch any of it. She looked at the shoebox for a long moment, though not at the statements, at the box. I understood that later. The statements were always going to exist. A bank keeps records whether anybody wants it to or not, and she had known for 14 years that they were sitting in a server somewhere waiting. The box was different. The box meant a person. The box meant that a woman she had spoken to at a copier in October of 2012 had gone back to her own desk and pulled her own journal and photocopied it and taken it home and kept it. You can outlast a bank. Banks merge and files move, and after a while nobody knows where anything is. You cannot outlast somebody who decided. Margot looked at the trust certificate for about 4 seconds, and then she looked out the window. And she said, "I told you to ask her about 11. You knew," I said. "I found out in 2021, Margot said, "when she paid for half my wedding out of nowhere, and I asked her where it came from, and she said your grandmother." Which was true. It was just not true the way she meant it. 3 years. Yes. You said nothing for 3 years. Margot turned and looked at me, and for 1 second she was not performing anything. "I was already using it," she said. "By then, I already knew what this family does, and I had decided to be somebody who does it too. So no, I did not say anything. And you can put that on the list, and it will not be the worst thing on it." Then my mother spoke. She had not moved. Her coffee cake was still in the middle of the table with the foil on. She said, "That money never left this family." I said, "Say that again." And she did. That is the thing. She said it again, louder, with her chin up, because she had been waiting 14 years to say it and she had it ready. "That money never left this family. It went into this house. It went into the roof over your father's head. It went into your sister's wedding, which you were at, which you enjoyed. It went to hold this family together while you were off in Columbus doing whatever it is you do. It was mine. It was for your benefit, she said. You benefited. You have a family. Where do you think that came from, Nora? It does not run on air. I left school. You chose to leave school. You sat on my bed and told me there was no money. There was no money, she said. There was a trust. That is not the same as money. You cannot pay a bill with something a lawyer wrote in 2010. Harriet Boone said, very quietly. You withdrew $4,200 on the 22nd of May, 2011. My mother did not look at her, and then she said the sentence that I did not see coming, and I have understood since that it is the only honest thing she said all morning. You never asked, she said. Not once, in 14 years. Not one time did you call this house and ask me for anything. You never even asked for help. Nora, I said. Mom, you never asked. I was 19, I said. You told me not to. She switched then. It took her about 8 seconds, and I watched it happen. She stopped defending it and started negotiating it. And she did not appear to notice that those are two different positions. All right, she said. All right. What do you want? Mom, no, I am asking. What is it that you want? Nora, because we can do this here, at this table, like a family, and it does not have to go anywhere else. Go anywhere else. You know what I mean. Harriet Boone said nothing at all. She had told me on the phone that this would happen and that my job was to let it. My mother put both hands flat on the table. I am your mother, she said. I carried you. I fed you. Whatever you think of me, I am the reason you are sitting in that chair. And you are going to have to live with whatever you do here for the rest of your life. And I want you to think very hard about that, because I will not be around forever, and you will not get this back. That is the whole speech. 23 years of church parking lots in 4 sentences. My father stood up. He had been quiet for 11 minutes, and when he stood up, I thought for 1 second that he was going to leave. He said, Call. How much? Dale. How much of it is gone? It went into the house. How much? Harriet Boone said. 185,000 plus 14 years of growth. The current balance is $4,180. My father sat back down slowly, and then he got angry. And this is the part I have had to be careful about ever since, because it looked like he was on my side, and it would have been very easy to take it. He was not angry about me. He was angry about the number. He was angry that there had been $300,000 in the general vicinity of his household for 14 years and nobody had told him. And he was angry the way a man is angry when he finds out a business partner has been running a side account. He said, Was any of it mine? That is what he asked, out loud, at that table, in front of everybody. Was any of it mine? I said. Dad. He looked at me. It was mine, I said. That is the answer to your question. All of it was mine. He opened his mouth and closed it. Then I said the second no. I said it to my mother and I said it in the flattest voice I own. And I had practiced it in the car, and it still came out worse than I wanted. No, I said. I am not settling this at this table. Nora, I am going to say why. And then I am going to stop. And I would like you to let me get to the end of it. She had used that line on nobody. Margot had used it on me in January. I did not do it on purpose, and I heard it as it came out of my mouth. 14 years, I said. $185,000. and a Sunday in February of 2011 when you sat on the edge of my bed and held my hand and told me that I was not the kind of person who does well with pressure. Nobody said anything. That is the one, I said. Not the money. I would have given you the money. If you had come to me in 2011 and said, Nora, we are in trouble, and there is an account with your name on it, and I need it, I would have signed it over standing up in the driveway. You know that. That is why you did not ask. My mother's chin came down about an inch. You did not take my tuition, I said. You took the part of me that thinks I can do a hard thing, and then you spent 14 years telling people I was the one who could not handle it. And I believed you because I was 19. And you were my mother. And who else was I supposed to believe? Harriet Boone then said what was in the file and what happens next, in 6 sentences, without a single adjective. An accounting had been demanded and produced. The distributions were coded for the benefit of the beneficiary. The beneficiary received none of them. There was a notary journal and a witness. A trustee has duties. The matter would be filed on Monday unless it was resolved before then. And resolution meant one thing and one thing only, which was full restitution with interest, in writing. And an apology, my mother said. You want an apology? No, I said. She looked up. I do not want one, I said. I would not believe it. My mother stood up and picked up her coat and left the coffee cake on the table with the foil still on it. My grandmother did not get up to see her out. That is the part my mother felt. I am sure of it, and I was sure of it in the doorway that morning. She had been in that family for 38 years. She had run that kitchen and hosted every holiday, and driven her mother-in-law to 2 funerals and a hip replacement. Nothing that happened on the 14th of December cost my mother as much as an 83-year-old woman staying in a chair. Ruth Ochoa left about 10 minutes after. She had said 4 sentences the whole morning, all of them answers, none of them offered. At the door she took my hand in both of hers and did not say anything at all, and went home. My father stayed. He sat at that table with the trust certificate in front of him for another half hour and did not read it again. At about 1 o'clock he said, to nobody. I never asked what she did with the checkbook. Then he got his coat. It was filed on the 16th of December. It settled on the 27th of February, 2025. Between those 2 dates, almost nothing dramatic happened. And I am going to tell it anyway, because the flat part is the true part, and everybody skips it. There were 3 exchanges of letters. There was one deposition, on the 10th of February, at Harriet Boone's office, where Ruth Ochoa sat at a table for 2 hours and 40 minutes and answered every question in the same voice she used at her own kitchen table. The other side's lawyer asked her why she had kept the copies for 13 years. He asked it 4 different ways, because he wanted her to say she had a grudge. Ruth said, because I signed them. He asked again. She said, my name is on them. I do not sign a thing and then walk away from it. That is the whole answer, and it is not going to get better if you ask me a 5th time. That is when it ended. Harriet Boone told me afterward that a case does not usually turn on one sentence, but that one did, and that the other side asked for terms 9 days later. The terms are these: restitution of $185,000 plus interest computed at the statutory rate, total $297,400, paid as follows. My mother's 5% of the company, valued by an outside firm at $91,000, transferred to the trust. The rest on a note, monthly, over 11 years. She will be 72 when it is paid. She resigned as office manager on the 3rd of March. Nobody asked her to. Denise Cobb told me afterward that she had not intended to raise it at all, and that my mother handed in a letter before anybody spoke to her. The money went into the trust, not to me. That was the part nobody in my family could get their heads around, including my father, who called twice about it. The trust does not terminate until the beneficiary turns 35. That is what the instrument says. It said it in 2010, and nobody could change it in 2025. Not my mother, not my grandmother, not me. So for 9.5 months I had $297,000 in an account with my name on it that I could not touch. And I kept working, and my rent was $1,400 a month, and I was 3 days late with it in January. That is the true shape of it. There is no scene where a lawyer slides a check across a table. My father stayed at the company. The board kept him on operations, and he is good at it. And he reports to Denise Cobb and to Sam. He has a badge and a parking space that is not marked. In April, he ordered new mats for the front entrance without asking anybody, and the invoice came to the board, and Denise let it go. Margot moved to Columbus in April. She works for a distribution company off the Outer Belt. We live 11 miles apart and we have not spoken since the 14th of December. Peter's matter is still open. It will be open for another 2 years. People ask me whether it felt good. I have stopped trying to give a polite answer. It did not feel good. It felt like the 27th of February. I got a phone call at 2 in the afternoon from Harriet Boone telling me it was done, and I said thank you. And I hung up. And I went back to a hymn. And at about 8 that night I sat down on the floor of my shop and stayed there for a while. What I felt was not victory, and it was not grief. It was the thing you feel when a long noise stops. I called my grandmother that night and told her, and she said good. And then she asked me what I was working on, and my grandmother got quieter. That is the only word for what happened over that winter. Not worse in a dramatic way, quieter. She would sit in the chair by the front window in the afternoon and not read. She stopped coming out to the plant in January. And then in February, she came out once. And that was the last time. On the 16th of March, she called me on the house phone at 7 in the morning. Nora! I'm here. I need Harriet at the house on Friday, and I need you to be here, and I need it to be this week. Grandma, what's wrong? Nothing is wrong, she said. I woke up this morning and I could not remember the name of the man who ran the boiler in 1980. I did not say anything. Ferrante, she said. It came back at about 6:30. It took 20 minutes. That happens to everybody. Nora. Her voice did not rise at all. I have never in my life needed 20 minutes for a name in that building. I have things to sign, and I am going to sign them while there is no question about whether I knew what I was doing. Harriet Boone came on Friday the 21st with 2 doctors, and I want to be clear that this was her idea and my grandmother's, and that nobody consulted me. 2 physicians, separately, in the front room, for about 40 minutes each. Then both of them wrote and signed a statement that they had examined her that day and found her competent to execute documents. That is what she was buying, not the money, the record. She said it to me in the kitchen while the second one was packing up his bag. When this is done, she said, there will be a piece of paper with 2 doctors' names on it dated the same day as my signature, and nobody in this family will ever be able to say I was confused. Harriet Boone came back the same afternoon with the actual documents, because the doctor's statements were dated the 21st, and she wanted the signature dated the 21st. 4 instruments. She read the effect of each one's out loud before she put it down, in the same flat voice she uses for everything, and she did not once tell either of us that it was a good idea. The first transferred my grandmother's 62% of Keegan linen and uniform. The second transferred the 8 acres on Ridge Mill Road, which had been in her name alone since 1971, and which the company had been paying her rent on for 53 years. An arrangement my father found out about in December, along with everything else. The third and fourth were the mechanics of it. An entity with terms, and one person named in it as the sole decision-maker. Total value, as appraised in February $8,300,000. She did not announce that figure. It was on the third page of the appraisal in 10-point type, and I found it myself while Harriet Boone was talking about something else. And I put my finger on it and lost the next sentence entirely. I want to say what that number is and what it is not. It is not cash. There is no $8 million. It is a laundry, a route book, 40-year-old machines, a building, and 8 acres of ground on a county road outside a town of 25,000 people. If you sold it tomorrow to Harlow Fenn, you would get most of it in money and they would close the plant inside 2 years. Because that is what a roll-up does, and everybody in that building knows it. And that is why Sam Whitaker said 22 years in a hallway in December. There was one condition. It is written into the instrument, which is unusual. And Harriet Boone told me twice that it is the kind of thing lawyers argue about, and that my grandmother had insisted anyway. The plant does not close for 5 years, not sold to a buyer who will close it, not wound down, not moved. 5 years from the date of signing. Why 5, I said, because that is how long it takes to train somebody, she said. And because 215 people made their plans on the assumption that this place would be here, and they made those plans without being asked. And they are entitled to 5 years of me keeping a promise I never actually made out loud. Grandma, Dad works there. Yes. You are protecting his job. I am protecting 215 jobs, she said. One of them is his. If I could write it so that his was the only one that was not protected, I would think about it. And I hope I would not do it. That is the closest thing to a joke she made all year. I asked her the question I had been carrying since August. I asked her why she did not do all of this herself. Why she did not remove Dale in 94. Why she did not confront Colleen in 12. Why she waited until she was 83 and losing the name of a boilerman to hand the whole thing to somebody else. She did not soften it. I want that on the record because I have thought about her answer more than about any other sentence anybody said to me in 2 years. She said, because I spent 30 years buying a family, and I did not have the right to spend anything else. A person who does nothing for 30 years does not get to come in at the end and be the one who fixed it. So you're giving it to me. I am giving it to the person who paid for it, she said. That is not generosity, Nora. That is a debt. Then she asked whether I had my pen. I did. It has been in the same pocket for 11 years. It is a plain black one with a fine point, and I use it because it does not bleed on cotton, and it is the pen I signed a proxy with on the 23rd of December, 2023, at a desk in the old accounting office with Sam Whitaker witnessing, and the pen I signed the attendance page with on the 28th. Both of those times I was signing for her. I took the cap off and I looked at the line, and I want to tell you what actually went through my head, which was not anything about money. It was that I do not loop. I stopped looping at 20 because my wrist hurt, and a woman used the old one on a document in April, and the difference between the two is about 1/4 of an inch of ink at the end of a name. I signed it 4 times. Downstroke, stop, downstroke, stop. Somewhere around the 3rd one, I understood the question she asked me before she said hello. Did you bring a pen that works? She was 83 and she had 4 certified letters in the mail, and a lawyer coming and a son on an airplane. And she needed one other adult in that house who could hold a document steady and put a name on it. And she had no way of knowing whether the granddaughter driving in from Columbus was going to be the kind of person who owned a pen. It was not a strange thing to ask. It was the only thing she needed to know. Harriet Boone notarized it and packed her bag and left. And it was about 4 in the afternoon and the light was going. My grandmother sat back in the chair and let out a breath she looked like she had been holding since 1994. Then she said, "Bring me the tin." The 21st of December, 2025. 37 degrees, no snow. The kind of gray afternoon where the light never really arrives and never really leaves. 55 miles. I have driven it 1,000 times. I turned in at the mailbox, and there were 2 cars in the driveway and the porch light was on. I went in through the kitchen door, because the front door still sticks. She was at the table. 85 now. Slower. She uses a walker in the afternoons and pretends the chair arms are what she is reaching for. In front of her was the tin, open, with the plaid lid faded worse than it was 2 years ago, and 4 small hills of buttons on a dish towel spread flat. "You're early," she said. "By 9 minutes. 9 minutes is early. Let me tell you what is different. The plant runs 211 people, not 215, because 4 retired and I did not backfill 2 of them, and I am not going to pretend that is nothing. Revenue was down 4% in the first year and up 2% in the second. Denise Cobb runs it. I am not the president of anything, and I have never once been in that building on a Monday. Sam Whitaker retired in June and then came back 3 days a week, which everybody expected. In the northeast corner of the old warehouse, there are 400 square feet with the good north light. And there is a Juki flatbed with a walking foot in it that has been running since July of 2024, and 2 more machines beside it now. 3 of us work there. Me and a woman named Bernadette who came off the sort tables and who has better hands than I do, and Marguerite Deal's granddaughter's friend, who is 22 and who came in asking about an internship that did not exist and who now runs the intake book. We take the garments that used to get scrapped, chef coats with failed neckbands, work jackets with blown shoulder seams. The route sheet has a code for it now. It is not a charity and it does not lose money and it does not make much either. The trust terminated this morning at midnight. $297,400 plus what it earned. My mother's 11-year note has 9 years left on it, and it arrives on the 8th of every month, and I have never once looked forward to the 8th. I did not buy a house. I bought the shop in Columbus, the actual building, the one I had rented since 2019. And the man who sold it to me had been trying to sell it for 4 years. I still work 6 days a week. Elias asked me once why, and I said because it is what I am. And he said, fair enough, and changed a belt. Elias comes to dinner on Sundays. That is where that is. I am not going to say more about it than that because it is mine. Ruth Ochoa came at 5 with a pie. She and my grandmother have Wednesdays now. Ruth drives out, they sit in the front room, and twice a month Ruth writes something down in a notebook because my grandmother asked her to, and neither of them has ever explained to me what is in it. Bernadette sent a photograph of her daughter's dress, the one out of the box in Coshocton that had been rained on. 9 weeks of work. It came out about 80%. And on that box, 80% was a very good outcome. My father is at the plant tomorrow morning at 6:30. He runs a floor. He is good at it. He has not been in this kitchen since the 14th of December of last year. My mother lives in an apartment on the west side. She sends the note payment on the 8th. She has never once been late, and she has never once put anything in the envelope with it. Margot is 11 miles from me in Columbus. Last May, we ended up in the same grocery store and saw each other across the produce, and both of us turned around. And I have thought about that more than I expected to. At about 6. My grandmother said, "Get the tin." I brought it over. "Bottom," she said. "Under the tray. There is a tray in that tin. A shallow cardboard one. And I had never once taken it out in 2 years of sitting at that table. Underneath, in the corner, there was one button by itself. It is not a uniform button. It is horn, dark, about 3/4 of an inch, with a chipped edge and 4 holes, and the thread is still in 2 of them. Cut clean, the way you cut it when you are taking a button off on purpose. That is the top button off a gray coat, she said. Shawl collar. You bought it on High Street. I did not say anything. You were 19, and it was hanging by one thread on the 14th of June, 2010, and I made you take it off in the car before we went into that bank. Because I was not going to have my granddaughter walk in there looking like nobody was minding her. I turned it over. There is a scratch across the face of it. 15 years, I said. 15 years. Why? And my grandmother, who kept 40 years of other people's buttons because they had been on somebody, said the only thing she has ever said about herself that sounded like praise. Because I knew what I had done that day was right, she said. And I wanted something in this house to prove I had done one right thing. I have it now. It is in a small dish on the windowsill over my machine, and it is not going anywhere. There is one more thing. My father sent a card. It came on the 19th, addressed in his handwriting that slants hard right and gets smaller, and it says Nora on the front of the envelope and nothing else. The postmark is the 17th of December, which means he mailed it 4 days early, which means somebody looked it up, or he finally asked, or he has known the whole time and has been 2 days wrong on purpose for 35 years. And I do not know which. It is on the table. Unopened. I have not decided, and that is the part I want to say plainly, because it is the whole thing. A note under a salt shaker, a photograph of a license in a parking lot, 14 years of a bank statement, a shoebox on a porch on the east side. I used to think this was a story about people taking things from me. It is not. It is a story about a woman who was never once asked, and who therefore never once got to answer. Nobody asked me if I could come at Christmas. Nobody asked me to sign that guarantee. Nobody asked me whether I wanted to leave school. Ask me now. I am 35 years old today, in my grandmother's kitchen, with a button in my hand. I am going to open that card. Or I am not. Either way, it will be because I decided.